a Superman action figure in a toy coffin, a blue shirt and red jacket, a first flight in the sun above the Arctic tundra. These are some of the moments that define my Superman fandom. Together on this podcast, we journey across time and media to examine, discover, and reconsider the creative visions that have shaped the Man of Steel. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. This is Crisis Til Death, Part 7. And for this episode, at long last, we are discussing the death of Superman and funeral for a friend. Joining me for this installment is returning guest, Bernie Gerstmayr. Welcome back.
Woo! I cannot believe, I'm so happy we got here. It's been exciting to listen, and I'm raring to go, baby. Let's do this.
This has been a long time coming in a lot of ways. This is a big episode, and I'll admit right off the bat, I'm feeling some pressure. It's all self-imposed, but it's one of those things where I said to myself, how can I fully and adequately articulate and encapsulate everything that the death of Superman has meant to me as a Superman reader and fan? It's how I got my start in comics and with Superman. It set me on this path. There's a straight line from the death of Superman to the comic shop alternate realities where I shopped and worked for many years, to the documentaries that I did about alternate realities and the comics retail industry, to the podcasts I've done, including this one, including this episode right now. So many, people and places that have become part of my life, and I can trace it all right back to the death of Superman. So there's a lot wrapped up in this for me, and I'm so glad to have you along for this ride as we unpack it all together. And I love that you have your Death of Superman poster behind you. You're wearing your Death of Superman shirt. Before we started recording, you held up your Doomsday action figure. I know that the Death of Superman means something to you as well. I know that it means a lot to a lot of the other Superman fans out there. And, again, I want to talk a lot about what it's meant to me personally, but I also want to talk about, and we of course we'll get into this, the story itself, because I think that a lot of times it is undervalued and underappreciated. And reading it this time, and we'll talk about it, but I got so much out of it, and I'm so proud that this was my first Superman story. So again, welcome. Thank you for being here. And before I just go on and on, because I certainly can when we're talking about Death of Superman, I want to kick it over to you. And can you? And I know we've talked about this before when you've been on the show previously, but for any new audience members here, and to refresh my memory, what role did Death of Superman play in your fandom? How did you encounter it, and what did it do for you at the time?
Yeah, the really cool thing about all of this is, so I think you and I are 10 years apart. I think what age were you when you read Death of Superman in 93? How old were you?
So yeah, end of 92, beginning of 93, I was 5.
Yeah. Okay. So when did you read it for the first time?
My dad read it to me when I was 5. As far as when I then actually read it myself, that probably came a year or two later.
Okay. So the cool part of my story is I read comics. I was born in 76. I was 5, in the early 80s. My dad got me into comics. But then about 5 or so years as a kid, I read books, but then stopped. And then 92, 93 is the end of my high school career. And I remember the store in Closter, New Jersey, that I was walking by, and I saw this Death of Superman poster. And I was like, what is happening? Superman is awesome. Why would they kill him? And that, for me, is when I rebooted being a comic book fan. So that brought me into the store. And since then, I left high school right into college, went to IU in Indiana, and found any comic book store that could have Superman 50-cent books that I could pick up and add to my collection, and just started working backwards, man, and then kept buying forward. So Death of Superman was really important to kick off my fan journey again as a new adult.
I love that. And, I'm sure for anyone listening or watching, they have their, if you're a Superman fan, you likely have some connection to the death of Superman. Maybe it's more tangential. Maybe it's more profound like it was for us. Maybe like myself, it got you into Superman. Maybe like Bernie, it got you back into Superman. maybe it turned you off Superman. I don't know. I'm sure there, we have fans in all of those categories, but it was a watershed moment for the character and for comics. I have my own little prop here. Again, if you're listening, and I know that's how the majority of our audience consumes these, so I know you can't see it, but right now I am holding up the Death of Superman trade paperback in a Mylar. It's pretty beaten up. I mean, the Mylar really isn't doing anything, but so just to protect it from any further damage. Cover price $4.95. How the times have changed.
That is hilarious. And I can still see it in used bookstores, and I'm like $4.95. Like now a trade is $19, maybe the cheapest in some cases.
Yeah. So and I know you followed my stuff for a while, and for any of my, any audience members who have been with me from my other podcast, My Comic Shop History, and if you've been with Digging for Kryptonite from the beginning, or honestly, if you've listened to any episode, because they all begin with that little preamble about the Superman action figure in a coffin. I've told this story, my comic book / Superman origin story, so many times that I think I'm going to retire it. I think I'm going to tell it one more time in this episode, and then I think that'll do it. But I love telling it because it was just, talk about a watershed moment for Superman. This is what it was for me. I mean, all of us as we go through our life's journey, you don't always have those signposts that are just like staring right at you and pointing you in a direction. And I had that in that moment. So, and again, for anyone who's been with me, I know you've heard this, bear with me one more time. It was, again, the winter of 92, and I was with both of my parents. We were at the Galleria Mall in White Plains, New York, in Lower Westchester. And, it was around holiday time, and we happened upon Heroes World, a comic book shop that's part of the now defunct chain. And in their window display was, as I mentioned at the beginning of all of these episodes, a Superman action figure in a quote-unquote coffin. Now, someone actually asked me about this on Twitter. It wasn't a Death of Superman playset. It was an action figure that was placed in a box. Now, again, this was decades ago. I can't remember if it was just a box that was, we pretended was a coffin, or if it was an actual coffin. Like maybe there was some horror action figure that came with a coffin or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, the intended effect was Superman action figure in a coffin. And as far as which Superman action figure it was, it's possible that it was the Kenner Superpowers figure, but given the time period we're talking about, more likely it was the Superman figure from the late 80s Toy Biz Superheroes line. Most likely that's the Superman figure that it was. And so they had that setup in the window display with the Death of Superman trade paperback behind it. And it just caught my attention. It grabbed me. And, to this day, I'm grateful that my parents stopped and that they took me into the store and that they bought me the Death of Superman trade paperback, and that we went home and my dad read it to me. I was 5. I was not reading yet, and he read it to me. And again, it just, it just set me on this path. So that's my my Superman and comic book origin story. And, the thing I always think about is, why did that even capture my attention and imagination? And, I guess I did have a sense of Superman. I had probably that very action figure at home. So it was that connection, if nothing else. Maybe I had caught, I don't know that I had seen Superman the movie yet. I don't think I did. It's more likely actually that I had caught some of the Superboy TV series on in the background as I was running around the apartment. Again, not to the point where I had this deep knowledge of and connection to the character, but just enough between the toy and maybe what I had seen on the background on the television at some point that there was some recognition there. And again, it set me on this path, and we're here. And again, there's a straight line from that moment to this one. So again, that's my origin story. I don't know that I'll tell the story again because I've told it plenty, but I love it. And again, I'm so glad that was the beginning for me.
I can just tell you right now that first of all, I'm looking at the figure that you're talking about. It's definitely going to be that DC Comics superheroes line that came out right after the Batman movie. It was really, really cool. I will tell you now that if DC released, I don't care what toy line did it, if they released like, the statue of Superman holding the eagle, and then like you turned it around and there'd be like a coffin and like a very gray action figures, and they will take all my money. They will. I will buy that playset the day it comes out.
For sure. Again, and this is not even a shameless plug, but the documentary that I did, My Comic Shop Country, the poster for which is over my shoulder here. In the movie, there's a sequence where I show a toy customizer who is actually building a Death of Superman setup, basically, where it's a dead Superman at the feet of Doomsday, and it's really, really cool. And again, I know DC has put out Death of Superman merchandise, but I guess not quite what I'm looking for just yet, but you never know.
Hey, we just got to find the right custom action figure people, man. We got to find the right people.
It's true. So again, there's so much that I want to ask you. I have some hypotheticals that I'm going to throw at you when we really get into the meat of the Death of Superman story, because there's a lot that's been kicking around my head. But kind of what I want to say first, because I think this is maybe the most important thing that I'll say within the context of this Crisis Till Death event that I've been doing here, as I've been, for the first time, reading the 7 years or so that led up to the Death of Superman. Previously I only ever read the story in a vacuum. And, I don't know about yourself, but it's not, and people might think, oh, you love Death of Superman, you probably read it every year. Again, I've read it maybe a handful of times in my life. That first time that my dad read it to me, I probably read it myself, like I said, a year or two after that, maybe one more time in elementary school. And then years and years went by, and then I finally reread it just a few years ago. I did a Patreon episode about it before I ever even did Digging for Kryptonite. And then again now. So, really a handful of times in my life. But this was the first time that I read it with the context, with the backstory, with all of the setup, with all of the development of the supporting cast that we've been talking about over these past few episodes. And Bernie, I got to tell you, what a gift. What a gift to be able to effectively experience this story with fresh eyes, as if I were reading it for the first time, just in a different way. It was, I went into the reading, assignment for tonight, and I was hoping that I would have that experience. But, they always say, keep your expectations low. And I was like, I'm hoping to have this profound experience, and I don't know if I will. And I did. And it's the sort of thing that, for anyone listening or watching, whatever your Death of Superman is, whether it's Death of Superman or whether it's something else, whether it's Superman related or not, whether it's comics or not, it's a book, it's an album, it's a movie, whatever. We all have those things that make that impact on us, and, things that we watch and we listen to over and over. And again, just to be able to have that experience of coming at it in a new way, it just hit me totally differently. I appreciated it more as a story. Previously, I appreciated it as a comics event and as an event in my life. This time, I appreciated it more for the story that it is. And I'll tell you, numerous times between the death itself and the funeral, I was choking up numerous times. I might do that during this episode because there were a few things that just hit me like a ton of bricks. And so I just wanted to say that first and foremost, that, this Crisis Till Death event has been this experiment, right? It's all been building to this. And I'm happy to report that I got out of it what I wanted to. And it just meant the world to me. Anything that you want to say, I want to toss it to you. And I guess the question I would pose to you is, again, how many times have you read this story? How often, if at all, do you revisit the Death of Superman?
I know this is going to sound with so many comics and stories out there. I think I read it every 2 years.
Good man.
I really do. There is something very emotional about the story. I know I read it again when the most recent animated film came out, and I don't know. That's a whole nother podcast. But I loved that approach. Obviously, there were differences, but that again, like that was like, oh, got to go back and read it. I'm really happy you did what you've done, because when you put the story in context and not event, it means a whole lot more. When you see why and how the tone of the comic book is shifting towards this time, it hits you a lot. And we're going to talk about a lot of the tone and why this is a big step forward in comic books in general, and not just the death of Superman. There's a lot of things that Death of Superman planted a seed in that both DC, Marvel, Image, a lot of publishers started to take note and go, "Oh, we can do this." Um, I love that you were able to enjoy the lead ups. I think the first story I went back to when I read Death of Superman is I read Crisis of the Crimson Kryptonite and moved forward from there. Because college kids budget was pretty low, and we were still finding 50-cent boxes, but like I filled in every one of those stupid triangles and made sure I could get where I needed to be to get to death and understand it better. Like, where were we going? Where's supporting cast going? Why do we care about these people? And why do they care for Superman so much? And Scott said it really well in a recent episode that the 90s, like 91 to 92, there was a lot, like they tried a lot of new characters, they tried a lot of things, but it was still fun. Like the tone was still, it wasn't as heavy. Like there were some tough things like in Soul Search and other story arcs that were hard, and Superman going off the deep end with like becoming gangbuster and that kind of stuff. It's like a therapist's dream. But yeah, I think it was really smart for you to read the way you did, and not just approach us like an event, but as something in a linear nature. I love it.
Yeah, I got so much more out of it, and again, we'll get into it, but I'll just say, generally speaking, it was, this might seem like a weird connection, but it almost reminded me of It's a Wonderful Life, which is one of my all-time favorite movies, and I watch it every Christmas Eve. And what always just touches me so much, as I'm sure it does for people the world over, is when you see at the end of the movie all the people in George Bailey's life, all the people he helped along the way over the course of the movie, they all show up for him. And I'm getting
You're already getting choked up.
I'm getting emotional. I know.
We're at the 30-minute mark.
Wait till we get to Superman 75 and they compare Superman and Doomsday to boxers, and that just calls to mind Rocky. I'm going to be a mess by the time we're done.
I know, buddy. You already ruined me making me watch the Rocky 4 trailer today.
Oh, Rocky versus Drago, the ultimate director's cut.
Hell yeah.
So excited.
I'm excited.
When it's Thanksgiving time and you can have a new Rocky movie, there's nothing better. There's nothing better.
Oh, I will give Fathom Events $20 immediately to watch that.
Yeah.
The big screen.
Absolutely. So, but so again, I know it might sound weird to kind of look at Death of Superman and think of It's a Wonderful Life, but in the movie, right, again, all these people George has helped over the course of the movie, they all show up for him. And as I was reading The Death of Superman and now having all these years with the supporting cast, it's like, you see Emil Hamilton and Mildred and Bibbo Babowski on the roof firing their laser at Doomsday. It's like they showed up to help him. Maggie Sawyer and Dan Turpin and the SCU. Oh, Lex Luthor II in his own way, and Matrix Supergirl. Like they're Lois and Jimmy. They're all there. Like all these people we have spent all this time with. The poor Kents, watching their son get pummeled to death on the news across the country. I mean, it just, again, all of it just meant so much more to me. And again, now knowing all these people, it hit in a new way.
Let's pause for a second too. So you name off all those people, by the way, humans, like regular people. And now they've watched for the last number of issues, this beast that Superman and the Justice League can't take down, yet they still go out with their belt force fields, and Turpin gets thrown across the alley. They're there because they're like, if I can do anything to give Superman a breather, I'm going to do it, even if it means I'm going to die. And that's how it works. And that's what friendship means. And again, we're going to need tissues pretty soon, I think, for this one. Like, there's a lot of really cool, deep stuff that this started in comic storytelling that I think we see a lot now and we take for granted.
Yeah, no, for sure. indulge me for a minute. I might monologue a little bit here, but in some ways I've been waiting my whole life to say all of this. I've thought a lot about what effect it has when your introduction to a character is that character's death. And the fact that for the first year, basically, that I was reading Superman, there was no Superman in the books. I mean, again, and we'll get into Reign and Return next episode. And, of course, Superman appears in that storyline relatively early, but, he's kind of off on the sidelines for a while. And you don't quite know exactly what's going on. Is it really him? And I've always thought about, like, what effect did that have on me as a comics reader and as a Superman fan, that I started with this story? And I think that as a comics reader, and look, detractors of this story might be like, what is this guy talking about? But I don't care. I feel like it set the bar very high in terms of what I expected from comics, or what I knew that comics could accomplish, because over the course of Death, Funeral, and Reign, you get action, just world-ending, earth-shattering action, quiet grief and drama, mystery and surprises, redemption and resurrection. It really runs the gamut. And so I think, I don't think it's a surprise that I fell in love with comics over the course of this first year of reading, because these stories had it all. They had it all. They really covered everything. So again, as a comics reader, I think it had that effect. And then as a Superman fan, and all day I've been thinking about this, because I did my reread last night, and it's just kind of been percolating in my head all day as I've been thinking about this. And I think in much the same way as the characters within the story mythologize Superman after his death, right? They're all telling stories about what he meant to them, what he did, what he inspires in them. He becomes something more than the man that these characters knew. Like, he really becomes something greater. And I think similarly, as the reader, Superman became more than this 4-color character on the page. He really became this ideal to me as well, and became larger than life. And, it's funny. I want to give a shout out to a fellow Superman podcaster, Tyler from the Krypton Report podcast. He wrote an article for the Daily Planet website. A shout out to Daily Planet as well. He wrote an article recently about the Superman symbol and what it means to him and to other fans. And he made, I think, one of the most salient points that one could make about it. It's easy to look at Superman and say, well, he's not real, he's a fictional character. But what that symbol means to people, the meaning that we all derive from it, that's real. That's something, and that's undeniable. And specifically within the context of Death of Superman, I think the thing that stood out to me then as a 5-year-old, even though I wouldn't or couldn't articulate it, but I think it was there in my mind, and now I can articulate it. The fact that, Superman was the last one standing, that he was the only one able to go the distance. There's our Rocky comparison.
Oh, there you go.
That he was able to go the distance, and that he was willing to make the sacrifice. Just put him in a league, no pun intended, all his own for me, at that point. And I made a connection to one of the stories that I read for a prior episode. It's the issue where Lois and Clark go to the mountains to discuss their relationship. And Lois says to Clark, "Why are you Superman?" She asks him this most fundamental question: "Why are you Superman?" And he says, "Because no one else can. I'm the only one who can do this." And I think that sometimes, especially in the comics at that time, and today, this is nothing, this has been going on for a while. There are so many metahumans and costumed superheroes that, sometimes I guess Superman might get lost in the shuffle, or he might not seem so unique. But I think this story just showed how much he does stand apart. And in Superman 75, when Lois is pleading with Clark, and she says, like, you can retreat, like, you can rest, like, maybe we can find another way. And he's like, again, basically echoing that same idea. It's like, no one else can do this. Like, the Justice League has already fallen. It's me. It's just me. And if I stop now, he's going to take out Metropolis. And again, it just shaped the way I see the character. And again, it's just not, I don't think it's a secret or a surprise, like, why this has resonated with me so much, and why Superman has always been and will always be my favorite comic book character. So, end of monologue. Thank you for indulging me in that.
And the podcast is over, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
See you next week.
Thank you for joining me, Bernie, for your 7 minutes. You know what? Like, I have a lot of people ask me, because again, I mean, I'm always, I mean, there's anything from a sticker on the back of my car to a shirt I'm wearing to a hat I've got to a backpack. I mean, you name it, that symbol is part of who I am. And people ask, like, why is he your favorite superhero? And I basically just say, if you strip away all of the powers that he has, he's still the best of us. Like, it's a bonus that he is the kind of strength that can stop a Doomsday, but it's really who he is and what he does and how he was raised and what he stands for that really is the ultimate hero. It's not about the hero because he can throw somebody across the planet. It's he's willing to do what needs to be done when people can't. And he could just hide it, keep it under a basket. Nobody would ever know. And he could try to live a regular life, but he knows he can't do that. And he's trying to have something of a life with Lois. And, the writers kind of send a curveball that way and say, well, no, you're still a hero. And I'm really happy you want to be, engaged to a really nice lady like Lois, but Doomsday's coming. And are you going to be Superman or are you going to be man? What are you going to be?
Yeah, no, exactly. And, we'll talk about Lois's role in this and the whole supporting cast, but yeah, the fact that, and as we've discussed in these previous episodes, they finally, I mean, again, post-Crisis didn't take that long, but in terms of the overall history of the character, it took over 50 years, but we finally had Lois and Clark in a relationship, and we finally had her knowing his identity. And,
yeah,
we'll talk about the backstory of the death of Superman, how it came to be, but, clearly the writers were they were building towards a wedding, and then they swerved, just as events swerved with, for the characters in the story. But it just, it added so much, and, so much emotional resonance that Lois knew that Clark was Superman and that they had this love. It really took it to another level. The fact that, again, generally speaking, I love the Kents being alive post-Crisis. There are a lot of times where that just boils down to nothing more than, Clark can pop over there and have some pie and get a little advice from Pa out in the field. And I love that. I'm there for that, no doubt. Mm-hmm. But when you can really take it to the next level, and again, you see that in the way they mourn him in these stories. You see it in prior stories, in the Krypton Man story where, Eradicator has corrupted Clark's mind. And, Jonathan and Martha are the only two who know what's going on, and they go and get their boy back. I mean, it's, it's one of those things where it's like, this is why you have the Kents alive. You can do stories like this.
Yeah.
So no, I agree with you completely. And, you mentioned, and again, this is not a shameless plug, but you mentioned the animated adaptation. Later in October, I'm going to be putting out sort of a bonus episode, a little epilogue to this Crisis Till Death event, where I'm going to be joined by returning guest Rich Wagner, who was with me for the discussion of the ethics and morality of Superman. He'll be joining me on Patreon. We'll be looking at that Death of Superman and Reign of the Superman, those animated adaptations. So we'll be talking about that as well, because there's a lot there, and especially in terms of the Lois and Clark of it all. I think the Death of Superman movie in particular really did a beautiful job of, again, depicting the grief and just also showing just, how this all kind of, that ties together, the sacrifice and the love that they have. So we will be talking about that for anyone who's interested.
And we're going to we'll probably go a little bit towards that, because there's a parallel between the Justice League that we get in this comic and the Justice League that we get in the adaptation. And there's something that I would definitely, that is one of the few frustrations that I have about this that we'll definitely get to.
Yes, I know where you're going, and I'm right there with you. And let's take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back, and we will really dive head on into the Death of Superman. So we'll be right back. The Hive Comics and Games is an oasis of nerd fun and events in the heart of Odessa, Texas. Whether it's comic book superhero stories or role-playing in a dungeon, the Hive is where to be. Come tap your mana and face off against the top Magic the Gathering players in West Texas. Hive carries a majority of new comic titles each Wednesday, and has all of your favorite titles in their back issue section. Follow them on Facebook at The Hive Comics and on Instagram at The Hive Comic Shop. Film lovers and filmmakers should check out this family of film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and In the Cut in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals generally, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Also, be sure to listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. All right, so how do we even end up with the death of Superman to begin with? I mean, I don't think we're going to really break much new ground here. This has been well covered, and the creators involved have given interview after interview over the years where they've talked about this. And we've even discussed this in prior episodes. But, essentially, the 4 Superman creative teams, right? And they would meet every year for their Super Summit with Mike Carlin, and they would map out the year's worth of stories, essentially, operating like a television writing staff. And they were building towards the wedding of Lois and Clark. And again, if you read the stories, it's clear, that's the Lois and Clark get engaged. That's a natural next step. But what was going on behind the scenes was that Warner Brothers was developing this, what would ultimately become the Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman television show, which would play up the love triangle among Lois, Clark, and Superman, would really get into the romantic tension, and would ultimately culminate in the marriage between Lois and Clark. And it was decided by who we'll get to in a second, but it was decided that the comics would pump the brakes on the Lois and Clark marriage and instead save it to line up with the TV show and do it when the TV show did it. Now, I always thought, and tell me what you thought, I always thought this was an instance of corporate synergy forcing its will on the comic staff. Was that your understanding?
Yeah, my take was that because of the show, the big wig said, I like that idea. You can't do that now. We're doing that on the show. It's going to reach more people, which is hilarious, by the way. It's going to reach more people. We'll talk about that later, too. But they said, no, I'm sorry. You can't do that. Hold off. That was my impression until about 2 weeks ago.
So in advance of this, I was doing a little research, and I came across an oral history of the death of Superman on the Sci-Fi website, and they interviewed Mike Carlin and most of the main creators who were involved. And again, it's the same names we've been talking about in all of these episodes: Dan Jurgens, Jerry Ordway, Louise Simonson, Roger Stern, right? Mike Carlin, the artists as well: John Bogdanove, Tom Grummett, and Jackson Guice. I think I've hit everybody now.
Carl, could you say Carl Kessel?
Well, he comes in with Reign of the Supermen. He comes in. He's with Adventures 501. So Ordway's final issue was 500, and then So we'll get to him next. Well, no, all good. We'll get to him next episode. But so they interviewed most of these creators, and what Carlin was pretty adamant about was that he, according to Mike Carlin, the editor, the group editor at the time, he and Jeanette Kahn, the president of DC at the time, they were the ones who decided that they wanted to tie into the television show. It wasn't something that Warner Brothers forced on them. They decided that they wanted to hold off on the wedding in the comics to coincide with when the TV show would ultimately do the wedding. In any event, they, it was basically sprung on the creators, and they really had to pivot away from the wedding that they were building towards. And again, this has been discussed in many, many interviews, but it had become a running gag at these super summits that whenever they got stuck, Jerry Ordway would throw out, why don't we just kill him? And finally, it was at this summit where everyone took it a lot more seriously. And it also dovetailed with ideas that Dan Jurgens had. He wanted to put Superman up against an unstoppable beast of a character, and he wanted to do an all-fight issue. That was another thing that, and so I think those ideas just kind of all came together and led to this. And we ended up with the death of Superman.
Right. There's another side of this too. So, and there's been like speculation too about comic sales. Comic sales were not doing well. And this decision, I mean, it really was a comic event. As we were talking earlier, they made it very fluid. I mean, they didn't decide 5 issues before it's going to happen. They
Right.
saw this a year out. So they did a very nice job of doing this. But from what it sounds like in articles I've read, sales were down. They did need something to bring people back to comics, which, by the way, brought me back. And now I've, for the last 30 years, been buying Superman comics. So it worked for them. Most people, I think, see the idea that was favorable. I think that the death was a good idea. They ran it well. Even the return, there's always going to be haters about how they did it. And we'll talk about that when we get to that episode next time. But, it sold 6 million copies. The Death of Superman issue alone sold 6 million. Like, stores were mobbed. There were lines around the block. Like, it did exactly what DC needed it to do at the time and allowed them, like, how deep do you want to go right now? Where do you want to go into what the Death of Superman did for DC Comics?
Sure. I mean, ultimately, I want to keep us on the story itself as much as possible. But yeah, I agree. I don't think we can ignore, the effect that it would have in the years to come. So yeah, I'm happy to go there.
Let me give you and the fans 3 things to think about. So first of all, the Batman getting his back broken by Bane wouldn't have happened without this death. We eventually have Green Arrow getting killed pretty close. We have Green Lantern going bananas. Let's see what else. Wonder Woman dies.
Yep.
And then Marvel goes, oh, we better do something. So then pretty close after that, the Clone Saga happened for Spider-Man. So this, and there's a whole myriad of things we're going to talk when we get to the story, but this was a linchpin for DC Comics to go, okay, this worked. What's next? And then other companies had to go, oh my gosh, they're a juggernaut. What's happening? But yeah, so like somebody compared, well, first of all, it's the first major A-list character of DC to ever die. Second, I read a quote that it was compared to killing Uncle Sam and apple pie. That's what they said killing Superman was like. I was like, but you know what? 1938. Like, that's a big deal for people that are reading since the Silver and Bronze Age, even, that are still around. So yeah, it's a big thing. Let's jump into the story of it, I think, and we're gonna unfold a lot of stuff too.
I want to pick up on a couple things because you're 100% spot on. I mean, the sales were lagging, right? And of course this, at least temporarily, really was a huge spike. But hand in hand with the sales, one of the things that the creators talked about in that interview and others as well was that, I guess, again, hand in hand with the sales was what they perceived to be this lack of appreciation for Superman, especially, at that point in the 90s, I guess other, darker, more violent characters getting more attention from fans. And this was an opportunity to say, hey, don't take this guy for granted. And I think it was Carlin in that oral history. I think it was Mike Carlin who said that, someone came up to him and was like, how could you kill Superman? And his standard response became, when's the last time you bought a Superman comic? And often the response would be like, oh, like I've never bought a Superman comic or, not in a long time. And he's like, well, that's why we killed him. So yeah, obviously there was, a lot going on again that led to it. And then a lot that it led to. And yeah, I mean, I think you cited all of the examples of the direct consequences of the death of Superman and the success of the death of Superman. And you see variations of it with all these other characters, both at DC and elsewhere. And again, ironically enough, my introduction to Spider-Man was the Clone Saga. So, these events, for better or worse, they, again, they made me fans of Superman. They made me a fan of Spider-Man as well. But anyway, that's how we got to the death of Superman story. And again, we're only talking about, I should have the exact number of issues right off the top of my head, but across the Superman titles and the issue of Justice League, I mean, the death of Superman itself is 7 issues. I think it's not a terribly lengthy story. I'll be honest, in the past, and in fact, when I did that Patreon episode about the death of Superman a few years ago, I think my main criticism was, oh, it's just a slugfest. Reading it now, I feel differently. I think in large part because now I've read everything that led up to it. So I'm not reading it in a vacuum anymore. I'm reading it, again, just as part of this line that I've been reading now. So,
Yeah.
I don't see it that way. And then even if it is a slugfest, and again, yes, it is very action packed, and the battle really is the meat of the story here. But I feel like it's so well executed in various ways. It's just, I don't know. I feel like it's very effectively told. Shall we address the decreasing panel per page structure that they utilize? Would you like to lay that out for our audience?
It is such a good idea that when I did not think until I read it more times, I didn't catch it. So they basically did a countdown to the death, and the four issues leading up to 75. So I guess it'll be the whole month. The first one, every panel had 4 pages. The third to last, every panel had 3. Then it was 2 big splashes. And then all of 75, every page is a 1-page splash panel. And that to me is incredible. And I think that's what made it so big.
Yeah.
Like you can see the full swings. They're both hitting each other. You can see like their arms are crossed. It's intense. It's a genius move from the artists and the storyboarding concept.
It's brilliant. It's why it's brilliant, and it's like I have to tip my hat to them because
tell me, Anthony, tell me why it's brilliant.
Because as a 5-year-old,
yeah,
I completely went over my head. Even when I read it when I was a little bit older, it went completely over my head. But I think subliminally it still works because it's still conveying the sense that we're building towards something and the action is getting bigger and we're getting pulled more into it. So even if you don't know, there are 3 panels per page in every issue of the third to last issue of the story, it doesn't matter because the effect is still there. And if you are aware of it, as we are now as we read it, it just from a technical standpoint, from a craftsmanship standpoint, it's so well done. And I think it's brilliant because it just works whether you get it or not. It still has the effect. And I just think it was such a great idea. And again, Superman 75, it's so iconic. And I mean, almost every one of those splash pages is seared into my brain. And, if it hadn't been for those splashes, maybe it still would, but that definitely made an impact.
Well, and for the record, we don't just get 1-page splashes. We get, you open the book and it's 2 pages connected into a double splash. Again, that's the thing. From a artistry layout standpoint, it is genius to be able to do that and tell the story knowing full well you're doing that too. That was an incredible thing that I still love watching. And honestly, every single one of those Superman 75 pages is like, they should make copies that are perforated, that you could just go like, and then like put one on the wall. It's so awesome. It should be wall art.
It's so funny you say that because when I was thinking about this last night, there are 2 things that come to mind when I think of wall art related to this. One is Superman 75. I agree with you. Mm-hmm. It's like you could hang up any of those pages. The other, and we'll get into Funeral for a Friend very shortly in this episode, but the covers to Funeral for a Friend, those, and I guess I can explain why. Death of Superman was read to me in trade paperback form. So the cover of that trade is very indelible to me, but the other covers weren't as much of a thing for me. But Funeral for a Friend, I read in single issue form. And those covers,
they're gorgeous.
The black and white photo of Superman dead on the pavement, the Justice League assembled for the funeral, Superman flying off into the clouds, like Jonathan lying face down in the fields on the Kent farm, like those covers. Again, I would happily hang, a reprint of any of those, on my walls for sure.
Anytime I see, I know this is ridiculous. I have the first prints in like to my right in the bin, but it's so pathetic, Anthony, that even when I go to a comic book show now, if I see any of those for like $2, I'm like, mine. And those are the wall copy. Those are the ones that go on the comic mount on the wall. My favorite one is there's one where they're all standing on the top of the Daily Planet, and there's the globe, and Superman's like tattered cape is like floating in air. I was like, oh my gosh, these are incredible. Like you're on point. Like I would use all that as wall art. Just keep them together, like put them right in a row.
No doubt. So as we're talking about the story, leading up to the death of Superman, and Scott and I mentioned this at the end of our last episode, but, there's very little buildup to the death of Superman. The only teases we get are for the month prior. At the end of each issue, we would get that one page of Doomsday's fist banging the wall, and we didn't know who it was, where it was, what was coming. Although, I guess the little caption said Doomsday is coming, so we had some sense. But that's it. I mean, it really kind of came out of nowhere, and that leads me to this. So this is the Wizard Death of Superman issue. You have that?
Oh yeah, baby.
I got to give a shout out to comics retailer Sean Hendricks of Fat Moose Comics in Whippany, New Jersey, because a few years ago, at a New Jersey comic convention, he surprised me with this, and I didn't know that it existed. Just like that Ruby Spears Superman cartoon, I'm constantly being surprised. I'm like, I didn't know that was a thing. And I read through this last night, and a ton of articles. I mean, the entire issue is just all Superman, all Death of Superman. Really interesting. But there are a couple of articles that, to be honest, are slightly critical of the Death of Superman story. It's not like a love fest. No. And I think that the criticisms that kind of came through in some of the articles in that Wizard, I think, are representative of some of the criticisms that people have of the story generally. And I kind of wanted to unpack them a little bit because they're very interesting to me. And one of them was that it came out of nowhere. And to me, it's like, but that's the point. It's like, the idea that like there's always something, or there always could be something out there that could take Superman out, and that it just happens the way that it does. Like it is out of nowhere. But again, I feel like that adds to the weight and the drama of the story. I don't see that as a weakness.
Well, like that's kind of a dumb statement to make when everything about the comics world and drama that happens is sudden. Like it's not like an Austin Powers movie where like, the guy's screaming, oh, and there's like a steamroller slowly moving towards him and he's freaking out. But like everything's about this. The fact that we even got the little tiny like bashes against the wall at the end, I would love to have been a reader at that point going like, what is happening? And don't forget, mind you, this is pre-internet. That's a big thing, that magazines and newspapers were the only way there. I don't think there were any, maybe on the news, when it happened. But if like, for example, if Batman was going to die, it would be already out in the internet, for a month before it happened. They ruined Batman's wedding issue by doing that, all that kind of stuff in current media. But I want to show you something. You brought that out. Have you seen this before?
Oh, yes, the News Time. So that's actually collected in the trades that you and I both have. And,
really?
And I don't often tout the DC app normally, but they have it there too. So yeah, no, so yes, I am aware of that for sure.
Oh, nice. Because I was at a store and I saw it like literally last week. I was like, oh, I'm going to get it. I got to look through it. And it's great because it looks like a real magazine. Like it's ridiculous. It's
brilliant. I mean, so News Time, right, exists within the world of the Superman comics. And so DC put out a special edition of the News Time magazine dedicated to the legacy of Superman. And so it reads as if you were in the DC universe reading this magazine.
I loved it.
It's really, really cool. And I think that was because there were a few specials. There was the Supergirl Team Luthor special. There was the Legacy of Superman special in News Time. Right. So after Adventures, after the final installment of Funeral for a Friend, DC ceased publication of the Superman books for a few months to create this sense that that's it, we're done.
He's dead. Yeah, he's dead, everybody. What do we do now?
But they needed other stuff to publish. I think that's kind of where that came from. But so I agree with you. I think that the fact that it comes out of nowhere and it's a surprise to the audience and to the characters, more importantly, I think that works. The other criticism, and this is where I have the hypotheticals that I want to pose to you, because I don't know where I fully land on this. Ultimately, I think this story made the right choice. In the end, in my heart, I think the story made the right choice. But I don't know. I think there's something to be said for a couple of alternatives. So the other criticism that again came up in this Wizard article, and that I think maybe others might feel, is that it was a mistake to have Superman die at the hands of a new character we've never met with no connection to Superman, who comes out of nowhere, as opposed to it being, Lex or one of the other members of the Rogues Gallery. And the Wizard issue actually even references the Silver Age story, The Death of Superman, from Superman 159 or 156. One of them. But we actually talked about it when we did our Superman in the Silver Age episode. And that's the issue in the Silver Age where Lex Luthor pretends he's reformed, lulls Superman into a false sense of security, and then kills him to death with kryptonite poisoning. And Supergirl then reveals herself to the world, brings Lex to justice, and takes over for Superman. And it's a happy-ish ending. As far as Silver Age stories go, it was actually one of my, I enjoyed it quite a bit. And it was an imaginary story, right?
There it is. Yes. That's how they got away with that. Yeah.
That's how they got away with it. But even in the context of being an imaginary story, as much as it was interesting and I enjoyed it, I mean, it's not, for me as a Superman fan, in no way, shape, or form a fitting end for the character, that he just gets tricked and defeated and bested by Lex, and that's just it. So for those who are like, oh, that would have been a better end, I don't agree with that. To each their own, but I don't agree with that. But I guess before I pose my hypotheticals, because I think there are a couple of alternatives that would be interesting, let me ask you, I mean, what do you think of the choice to use this new creation of Doomsday to be the one who brings about the death?
I never had a problem with it because I feel that we know the whole Rogues Gallery, and they've had numbers of times to try to kill Superman over decades. I think if we're going to kill Superman, it needs to be something that is confusing to people, and especially confusing to Superman. Like here, I'm going to give you a few quotes from how Doomsday is described. He's more single-minded than Draga, and more irrational than Lobo, if that's even possible. So that was the first thing he's saying. He's like, I don't get this. It's kind of like, as a Rocky fan, Rocky fought Creed, Mr. T, and then Drago's like, this guy's not human. Like, who is, like, this is not good. And there is a parallel to the Superman Doomsday fight because it's just incredible. He keeps hitting him and saying, I remember the quote where Superman goes, is it possible he's getting stronger? And I didn't remember that until I read this read. I was like, whoa, like, so is it possible that every time Superman's hitting him, that he's actually getting stronger? Like, is he absorbing it and giving it back? So I think it was a good choice. I think because it perplexed Superman. What do you got? What do you like? Does that jive?
That's, in the end, that's where I land as well. I think that Superman's death coming at the hands of this unstoppable force of nature who comes out of nowhere, and we don't know his deal. And eventually Doomsday's origin will be told later on in subsequent comics. But for purposes of this story, we have no idea, and the characters have no idea.
Yeah.
I think there's just something very pure and elemental about it. And if you're going to kill Superman, I think that's the most fitting way to do it. And the creators in their interviews have addressed that, they didn't necessarily feel that any of the existing Rogues Gallery really had it in them, which I do tend to agree with. And, if it ultimately comes down to, as in the case of that Silver Age story, like Lex getting one over on him or something like that, it cheapens the whole affair and it diminishes the character of Superman. So I don't think that was the way to go. So I think ultimately the choice to use a new creation and to use this mindless beast, whose origins are a mystery to the characters, I do think overall that was the right choice. One thing I wanted to pose to you, because we talked about Mongol in our discussion of Superman in the Bronze Age, and we talked about For the Man Who Has Everything. And earlier in this podcast miniseries that I've been doing, we talked about Mongol in the Exile storyline. And I was thinking about it because I think that ultimately, right, Superman's death, it needs to be this to the death physical confrontation. It can't be he's poisoned by kryptonite, right? It has to be this fight to the end. So that initially like really shrinks the pool of like who are the opponents who could actually go toe to toe with Superman to the end. Mongol potentially could.
Yeah.
One potential advantage of Mongol, if story wise, if you were interested in this, is that there is a personal connection there. We do have that backstory from the War World, episode of the Exile storyline. Mongol is not a mindless beast, right? Like he can actually converse with Superman. And of course, we all know, right? We're going to deal with Mongol in our next episode when we talk about Reign of the Superman. But the thought crossed my mind. It's like, what if it had been Mongol? So you still have the fight to the death. You still have the physical confrontation, but you do have some history, some backstory between the two characters. You do have some dialogue between the two characters. I mean, is that something that you think would have been interesting to see, or you think still ultimately Doomsday was the right way?
That's a really cool question, actually, because I've always thought, and we'll get to this in the Reign, I feel like Mongol comes out of nowhere in like at the end, like with the Coast City issue. We'll talk about that, but I think it could have been really cool that Mongol shows up for revenge, because really the way it was left was Superman kind of ruined his whole jive. Like every plan, his War World, he basically created a revolt and ruined what Mongol had going there. What could have been really interesting was Mongol releasing all of his followers into Metropolis and just wreaking havoc and holding people back while Mongol beat the living hell out of Superman in front of them. And that's like, he goes, I'm going to kill you now. And just so you know, after I kill you, I'm killing all of them. Like that would have been like, oh, damn. Like, and then to lead into the Superman coming back, and then Mongol's about to toast Coast City. And that would have made a little more sense there. But again, there's other plans behind Mongol in the Reign of the Superman. So that's how they fixed that, I think. But I dig it. Like hey, you know what? If Marvel can do the What If episodes on Disney Plus, I think they better start doing maybe a What If on or else if they could. Oh man, can you imagine they did an Elseworld series on HBO Max? I'd watch that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, he was the one contender where I was like, there might be a way to still keep the essential heart of the story, that there's this fight to the death, but add a more personal, intellectual, emotional component to it.
Yeah, like a vendetta.
Yes. Now, that being said, like I said before, in my heart, I do think Doomsday was the right choice. And, I'm not a horror fan really at all, to be honest, but I mean, this almost like plays out like this horror movie where, we and the characters are like just baffled by him. And I think the story really does a very effective job, right? The golden rule of writing, show, don't tell. And I think this story does a great job where you see this character of Doomsday carving this path of destruction for the first few issues with one arm tied behind his back, decimating the Justice League, taking, going toe to toe with Superman. Again, going back to, to Rocky here, it's like, Superman's been tested before, but never to this extent. And it's a very powerful effect as you're reading the issues. And it's just like, for Superman and for the characters watching Superman, it's like, well, Superman always wins. So it's like, of course there's nothing that stops Doomsday. And I think it's very effective. This, I might sound insane when I say this. As I was reading the story, I knew rationally, intellectually, obviously Superman's going to die. I know, right?
Did you think it's going to change? Like, did you think maybe it'll change differently at the end?
But it's like this gut, it's like this gut feeling where it's like, maybe he'll win.
Maybe the pages have changed in the last 5 times I've read the trade.
But I think that's a testament to the story where it's like you don't want to see Superman fall. No. And it's like you'll trick yourself. Again, in my mind I knew, but in my heart, in my gut, I was like, maybe he'll win.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, This is one of my and you just read it last night.
Yeah.
Was it last night? Okay, so one of my favorite pages in the entire run. So this is just after Booster gets thrown across the country, and Superman catches him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the last page of that issue, he said it's like Doomsday, so he names him. One of my favorite panels in the entire trade is Superman, like for the first time, is standing in front of Doomsday and says, "What did Booster call you again? Oh, right, Doomsday." And Doomsday hits him, and Superman doesn't even move. He just stands there. It's like, douche. And you're like, oh, damn, Superman's going to beat the hell out of him. And then Doomsday roundhouse kicks him in the gut and sends him flying. I was like, and like you're saying, you're going, oh no, oh, this is not going to go well. Wait a second. Why would anybody be able to kick him that hard and send him that far flying? So you also just watched, again, just to swear once, you watched Doomsday beat the living shit out of the Justice League. And I'm reading it again. And even reading it after like just 2 years, we're talking about like if Blue Beetle has no powers whatsoever, and he grabs him by the head, bashes him into the pipe, into the wall. I mean, he treated him like, remember that scene when like Hulk did to Loki?
Yeah.
Like he just like whipping around like a rag doll. He does that to Blue Beetle, Booster, Guy. He steps on Ice's chest and you like hear ribs crack. So I was trying to think back at this time frame. We're talking about 1992. What comics? I don't think any comics had that kind of human trauma. And Doomsday literally grabs construction workers' heads and crushes one into a bloody pulp and snaps the neck of the other guy. And I was like, what is happening in comics? What just happened in comics? So that was huge.
Well said. And, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but, one of the things that I appreciate about this story, especially as we get into Funeral for a Friend and beyond, I feel like the story very seriously and realistically treated the destruction that a battle like this would cause. That's why, and again, I'm going to stay on my Zack Snyder soapbox for like a second.
Oh, you did
like
it.
A second.
I was like, fans were at an hour, I think. He made it a whole hour.
I made it an hour. But it's like when you look at that battle in Man of Steel and it's like, oh, it's destruction porn. It's like, well, what do you think would happen if these two superpowered beings fought for that amount of time? It's like, the city would be demolished. Anyway.
Yeah. Do you remember the scene above? There's the scene above where you see like the path that Doomsday took through, like the highways. There's cars falling down. Like that's what would happen if this guy could do that. He was destroying trucks and people like he didn't even care. And that's what was more frightening as a reader to me.
Yeah.
That you don't even, first of all, you don't know who this is. Second of all, you don't know why he is. And third, he's just killing people. We've never seen, you've read from 1987 to now. Name one person who has died in a way like that in those 7 years.
True, and or has died with no purpose. It's like every villain we've encountered has some agenda that you can identify, and here you don't have that, and that's very powerful. I mean, again, Doomsday is really just this elemental force of nature, and I think that's what you need if you're going to do a Death of Superman story. Going back to this idea of like the mystery of, one of the things that I really do like is that over the course of these, half a dozen issues, various characters posit theories, on who Doomsday may be, like a leftover from Warworld, right? Because that's a possibility. A Cadmus creation, a Luthor creation.
Well, that comes up. That happens. They say, like, did we make this? Like, even the Cadmus people, they're questioning themselves. Like, is this ours? Did we do this? That's messed up to begin with.
So I love this idea that the characters in the story are asking the same questions and posing the same theories that readers likely would as well. And of course, none of those are true. Ultimately later in the Superman Doomsday Hunter Prey miniseries, by Dan Jurgens, we'll find out that Doomsday was a Kryptonian creation, this ultimate killing machine.
And we're talking, and they don't even do the full reveal then. That's just, they find out that he's Kryptonian. not until the year one in 1995, 2 years later, does Jurgens go, oh, by the way, he's a killing machine because the Kryptonian scientists put a baby out into the world and let it get killed over and over again and grew to this disgusting, awful beast. 2 years. Like, that's a long time to go, yeah, no crap, this thing would kill Superman if he was known that.
Yeah. So now here are the hypotheticals that I have for you, aside from the manga piece, but now specifically relating to Doomsday. As Scott and I have discussed in prior installments of Crisis Till Death, both of us really liked the Eradicator storylines, the stories that really depicted this tension for Clark between his human upbringing and his Kryptonian origins. Do you think there would have been any value in the reader and potentially the characters themselves knowing Doomsday's Kryptonian origins during the death of Superman? You know, if for those like myself and like Scott, like who are fans of Day of the Krypton Man and all that Eradicator stuff, like would it have been as effective, more effective to know that Doomsday was Kryptonian during the course of the story?
I don't think it would have mattered, because even if you think about the destruction or even fake death of Doomsday, Doomsday is not dead.
True.
So, and he doesn't die by the typical kryptonite or any sort of form that we know of that would hurt Kryptonians. So I don't know whether I think it might have been a moot point if we knew. It might have just added more confusion, like, why is this person coming after Superman if he's from Krypton? So if anything, it could have added confusion, but I don't know if it would have made a big difference for the characters to know that ahead of time.
Fair enough. Now, the flip of that question. Again, as you and I have discussed, right, ultimately we do get Doomsday's origin. It takes years before we get the entire thing.
Right.
And also, and for our audience here, we're going to talk about the Hunter Prey and the Doomsday Wars and subsequent Doomsday appearances in the future on the podcast. We'll get to all of that. Don't worry. But I guess my question to you is, what I would say is that I do feel like Doomsday is a character where the law of diminishing returns is at play in a real, real big way. It's like when your claim to fame in your first outing is killing Superman, there's like nowhere to go but down. And so I don't know that subsequent Doomsday stories have really done all that much. Like, and that kind of leads me to my question. Do you think that it would have been even more powerful and effective if we never got an origin for Doomsday, and if Doomsday never returned? Like, if that was just it, like he came out of nowhere, he killed Superman, and we just like never knew where he came from? Or is it one of those things where it's like, no, like, of course you have to eventually explain where this guy came from?
That's a really kind of interesting, because I think it would have been really cool to never know.
I kind of think so too, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, but the problem is whether it's Hollywood or TV or comics, you get something that works like that, you're going to milk it for everything you can. Like, they're going to bring him back. And unfortunately, like we learned from bad sequels, it doesn't always work the way it worked originally. And it goes down. Like you said, what do you do from there? The one thing that was kind of neat was when Doomsday gained intelligence.
Yeah.
And you'll get to that. It was interesting. Like, oh. And they did some cool stuff recently with the Doomsday cells being a virus and taking over Superman. That happened in recent comics, actually. Like Super Doom, like DNA hybrid, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, man, I think that could have been really interesting, where we don't know where he came from. Because you know why that would have been scary? Is if you didn't know where he came from and he killed Superman, what if there's more of them?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if he came out of nowhere and he's buried in a box underground and came out of this, wouldn't that kind of freak you out as a superhero on Earth, going, what if there's a race of Doomsdays out there that we don't know about and Superman just died? We're screwed. Like that. I think that could have been really interesting, but I mean, I think we as fans always like to know more. Like, all right, where did he come from? And somebody will appease us because that's their job. But I agree with you. I think it would have been nice to just keep it a total wacko mystery. Like, yep, we don't know. He's dead.
That's the thing. It's like, due to the nature of superhero comics and publishing, it's like, yeah, of course,
Yeah.
I don't think that would ever fly. Like, of course they're going to tell more stories with Doomsday. I get it. I totally get it. But yeah, purely from a story perspective, I think there's really something about, like, if we just never knew. Again, that's not how it played out, but that was one of the things that I thought of. And I want to circle back to something that you had said before, which of course was on my mind as I was reading this. And it's one of the only real criticisms I have of the story. And it's not even, I mean, I don't know if that's even a fair criticism to make, because they were just working with the characters they had at the time, which I get, I appreciate that. But it does date the story, and it also, it does diminish it a little bit. What I'm referring to, of course, is the lineup of the Justice League.
Yeah.
At this point in time, we are not dealing with the heavy hitters. We have Fire, Ice, Guy Gardner, Maxima, Bloodwind, Blue Beetle, Booster Gold. Again, it's not the big seven. And you know, I'm going to talk about the Justice League more in the future on this podcast, especially as we kind of expand our focus and start talking more about other characters and teams as well. But it's interesting that, you know, pre-crisis, you know, you did have the heavy hitters on the team, and shortly thereafter, the period of time we're talking about now, when Morrison comes on, we'll get the heavy hitters again. But
Right.
there's this pocket right within which the Death of Superman falls, where you have more of the, like, the B and C list characters. And I do think, in all fairness, it takes away a little something from the story. And I say that having watched the Death of Superman animated adaptation, where there the Justice League is Wonder Woman and Green Lantern and Flash and Aquaman and Martian Man, like the big characters. And so when you see Doomsday take them down, it's like, oh, this is a heavy hitter here. What are your thoughts?
That is my ultimate. That's my ultimate criticism too, because okay, if Batman can get his ass to the funeral, why couldn't he get his ass to Metropolis?
Yeah, all of them. Like they're all. I know, all of them.
Like, where's Wonder Woman? Where are they? And like you put up. I mean, really, come on. You literally put up like one guy in a Beetle suit, and then a force field. Booster's wearing a force field. Guy Gardner's got a ring, which should be actually a lot stronger. And Bloodwind, who is ultimately, we find out to be Martian Manhunter.
Yes. Yeah.
So, but I guess I just never understood. Maybe you have them get the crap kicked out of them, and then in the second, like, penultimate issue, Wonder Woman, Batman do show up, and they get the snot kicked out of them to give Superman a breather, and then he goes, I'm on my own here. Like, it just felt like there was a really big gap between, like, Blue Beetle and Superman. Like, that was confusing to me, and it still perplexes me as a decision. But Anthony, remember, you said what you said, though, isn't fully accurate pre-crisis. So the pre-crisis Justice League lineup was also kind of a dumpster fire too. Like, it was Commander Steel, Gypsy, Vibe, Crimson Fox, Wannabe. Like, it was a lot of B-list characters. And when they rebooted the Byrne era, don't forget, they started Justice League, and that was like Keith Giffen and DeMatteis doing it. And it was, Batman was the only A-lister in the whole Justice League at that point. He hated the fact that he was in charge of them. And it was kind of like a running joke, like, who are these Justice Leaguers? And I just think it sucks that the joke kind of lasted into the Death of Superman trade, where that was the first line of defense. There's something I want to say about that issue, though, but I want you to jump in and see and offer a few comments too.
No, fair enough. I mean, yeah, I guess as far as the, you know, the pre-crisis, yeah, no, I don't dispute what you just said, but I mean, I feel like there were, again, I mean, like, some of the more iconic characters, right, that were part of the team then. I mean, like, again, the lineup that we get here, and, you know, not to put down any of those characters, I know they all have their fans, but again, I think in terms of just the effect that it has, it's like, it would have meant, I mean, it's still effective in seeing Doomsday dismantle this version of the League. I just think it would have been more effective, right, to see him take down characters who are more powerful, characters who are, again, getting closer in power level to Superman. It says more. And I do agree with you. It's like, again, this was the version of the Justice League we had at the time. So if the story began with this Justice League as the first line of defense, great. But even if there, had just been one issue where any of these other characters tried to step in, especially since we do see them all come to the funeral and mourn Superman. Yeah, I don't know. That is a very curious choice. And I don't know if the creators have addressed this in interviews since then. I would be curious to read, because it's like, I do feel like that would have added something to the story if you saw those other characters. Now, again, counterpoint, the story I think does do a good job of conveying that this all happens within a very concentrated amount of time.
Oh yeah, sure.
Right. We're only a matter of hours. So, okay.
So like one day at least, maybe one day. Yeah.
Right. So they all, could have been otherwise occupied. So, I mean, I think, that's in all fairness, like we'll keep that in mind. But if one of the issues had shown some of these other characters like Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, Flash, trying anything and being taken out, I think that would have been effective.
Or really anybody on this poster.
Yeah.
Like Swamp Thing.
You have the Funeral for a Friend poster behind you, which has basically the entire DCU, coming out to mourn Superman.
It should just be at the bottom. It says, "Where were you guys?" That should have been the bottom of the poster.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite reread moments of this, which I actually didn't remember, is the teenager Mitch and his mom and the little baby are in the house.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that like the first thing you see happen is either, it's either Ice or Guy Gardner gets thrown through their window. Like they're having a regular like teenage kid and his mom argument. Superhero comes flying through the window, just demolishes the living room. Baby's crying. By the end of the issue, house is on fire, demolished. But what I really loved is that the next issue, it's told from the point of the view completely of the teenager. And he's telling the story of what just happened and what's happening now, and actually like yelling out for Superman, like, please come back. We're going to die in this fire. Don't leave us here. And Superman hears him, but has to ignore the kid. Like, that's very clear. I got it. I can hear him, but I got to ignore him. I don't know where he's going next. And he does get back there, I think, somehow. But still, I thought that was a very interesting choice, that let's tell it from somebody who had just had their house caved in by Doomsday instead of just a Superman text box.
So I have three things to say about Mitch. I'm so glad you brought him up. So, number one, going back to what we were saying before, the creators have expressed this feeling that, one of the reasons they wanted to tell this story was that, they felt that fans were not appreciating the character of Superman. So, I think that Mitch, perfectly encapsulates and represents that attitude, right? So I think that's the main function Mitch serves in the story. Number two, and this is just a quick side note, but for Superman readers who were there in the late 90s, Mitch comes back as the character Outburst. He becomes a superhero in his own right during the Superman, the King of the World storyline. Right before Jeff Loeb and Joe Kelly take over. It's kind of the last hurrah of Dan Jurgens and that group of creators.
Right.
But then the third and final and probably most important thing I want to say about Mitch, as I've said, right, I originally read The Death of Superman in a vacuum. As I think a lot of other people did too, whether they were new to comics or they were new to Superman, right? They read The Death of Superman. Obviously, as I've said, I got a lot more out of the reading experience now, having read everything that led up to it. But I do still think the story works well on its own. And, I think, I don't think that's an accident, right? I'm sure the creators anticipated that there would be new people sampling the Superman books. So as much as you do have, Bibbo and Emil and Cadmus and Lex the Second and Supergirl, they don't overpower the story. And I think it was a smart choice, and I think it was a very calculated choice that, for a lot of this story, it takes place outside of Metropolis, right? It's this path of destruction, from Ohio, and across the country to, moving east, as Doomsday is heading towards Metropolis. And using a character like Mitch, who we don't know, right? That's the thing. We've been talking about this vast supporting cast that's been developed over the preceding years. Mitch is not one of them. Mitch is a new character we meet. And I think it works really well because for, a kid like myself reading this for the first time in the 90s, it's like, that was a new character you could kind of, even if you didn't share the views of the character, it's still a new character. It's like a way into the story. So I think it was very smart to utilize the supporting cast, which I think does enrich the story for longtime readers, but to not overuse the supporting cast such that it alienates new readers. I think they really struck a very nice balance. And I think Mitch is kind of a good example of that.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the connection between the path of destruction was really cool. So we see it very specific, like in a family's household, that we see it where now it's affecting, I forget what the name of it, Lexmart?
Yeah, Lexmart.
I think he goes, they're fighting inside the fake Walmart. And even Lex, that's when Supergirl keeps asking Lex, like, should I go help? I feel like I should go help. I'm pretty sure I could help him. And Lex is like, no, I need my Supergirl here. I'm like, that's weird, dude.
You got to do, Bernie, you got to do the Australian accent.
And she even gets to a point, and she tries to...
You got to do the Australian accent.
I need my Supergirl here. Oh, God. But it's just kind of odd. And she even goes the financial route and says, Lex, he's kind of destroying one of your stores. Are you sure you don't want me to go help out? And he goes, nah, I've got plenty of stores. So there's my crappy Australian accent for all you fans. But what's really interesting, so is the scene where he's watching wrestling on the TV.
Yeah.
That was where Doomsday stops in the Lexmart, sees like the fake wrestling ad, and I forget what the line is, but it's like, there's gonna be destruction and death, and Doomsday loves that, so he's maybe like you see him or hear him say Metropolis, and he's like, he wants to go there because there's death and destruction there, and Superman's like, oh, you got to be freaking kidding me. So that he's got to follow him to Metropolis, and then all the chaos ensues there.
Yeah, I forgot that Doomsday kind of, again, to say he speaks is probably a little generous, but that he at least grunts out Metropolis, right? But also the laughter. I'd forgotten about the laughter throughout the story when he kills the bird from the very beginning, right? And he laughs.
So messed up. Yeah.
It's really messed up. And I had completely forgotten that. And I was reading it. It's like, oh yeah, like there is this, again, as much as Doomsday is presented as this mindless killing machine, he does seem to take delight that he expresses verbally via his laughter. So there was that.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm jumping, kind of towards the end of Death of Superman. We still have to get to Funeral, so we still have ground to cover here.
Right.
But one thing that has always stood out to me, and even more so now in Superman 75, really towards the end of the battle where Lois is talking to Clark, like as he's fighting, and Clark's like, I have to, like, Doomsday just wants to kill. Like, I have to be every bit as ferocious as Doomsday is. And Lois is like, no, Clark, like, he wants to kill and you can't. It's like, damn it, woman. It's like, like, look at what we've gone through here. It's like, whatever he needs to do to beat Doomsday is fine. Like, come on.
Do you want to go help mop the puddle up of that construction worker and say that again? Like, no, go sit down and shut up. I got to go kill this guy. Yeah, like, you don't kill. Like,
yeah. I mean, this isn't the, the John Byrne Supergirl storyline where he's coldly executing three powerless criminals. I mean, this is a fight to the finish here. That just always stood out to me. And especially as I'm reading it now, it's like, I don't know that was the right advice in that specific moment.
Yeah. A very weird choice to then remind Superman, like, hey, don't forget you can't kill. You don't like killing people. Like, no, this guy needs to die. He's already killed. I think at one point it says he's killed hundreds of people so far.
Yeah. I mean, again, going back to the realism of this, I think in terms of the death count, in terms of the destruction, which again
Mm-hmm.
is not wiped away. I mean, for months and months to come, there's, Metropolis is in shambles, and, there are people, including Clark, right? As far as the world at large knows, but actual people who are trapped underneath. And I think the stories do a good job of showing the actual ramifications. And I mean, sadly, but, in a real world parallel, again, reading this as a kid in the 90s, it meant something, but now having lived through something like 9/11 and, knowing what it's like when you see, a catastrophe of that scale, it's like, yeah, again, I think the story did a good job of showing the direct, very tangible consequences of a battle like this. And I'm glad that the stories, really did take the time to show that and not gloss over it,
Can I ask you, in your recent reading of all the issues leading to this point, can you remember a point where Superman bled?
Oh, where he bled?
Like when he,
No.
like,
yeah, I know. I mean,
that struck me every time I read it, that strikes me every single time. It was like, oh, he just got cut by Doomsday's like bones coming out, and they bring it up, and I could not remember, like, when's the last time you see Superman bleed?
Yeah, and audience members, if there's something that's not coming to my mind that comes to yours, please feel free to reach out. But yeah, there's nothing that comes to mind. Scott and I talked about this in prior episodes. We see the cape. The cape gets tattered a lot, and I think that's a very efficient and effective visual cue for the reader that, like, oh, it's a tough battle, right? Like his cape has been damaged, but rarely is the actual costume damaged. That does happen sometimes, but rarely. But in this story, it's like, it's the cape, it's the costume, and then it's his body. We really do go further than we've gone before. And again, just all these cues, visual and otherwise, that are really like letting us know this, we're in new territory here. So yeah, I think that's a great point.
He's bruised. You see like bruise marks on him, like not just cuts, but like, and like I was thinking back, like, I don't know if I've ever seen a bruise on him. That's what they're trying to get across. At this, like you said, you've never seen anything like this before, and that's what can kill a Superman.
Yeah. I guess I have a couple more observations about the very end of this, but is there anything else about the death of Superman generally, or before we get to the end of the death of Superman, that you wanted to talk about that we haven't yet?
If you love this story, I think this year they released a series called Tales of the Dark Multiverse, because there's been all this stuff going on with like, what is it called? It's not heavy metal.
Death metal.
There's all different dark metal, death metal. There's a lot of Elseworld stuff coming out. And they have like a character that's kind of like Marvel's Watcher that is going through this dark multiverse. And one of the issues is on the death of Superman. And it goes up to where Superman does die, but then Lois takes a very interesting turn after his death. So it's worth the read for anybody interested out there. And you could probably still pick it up on Rex or talk to your comic shop. It's worth it.
Oh, nice. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I was not.
Cool.
I was not familiar with that, but that's cool. Yeah. Was there anything else before we kind of get to the end here?
No,
no pressure. I just want to give you the opportunity in case there was.
No, yeah. I think I covered. Oh, okay. This is more of an Anthony fun thing than like a Death of Superman. And I got reminded by your Smallville action figure on top of your shelf. Did you catch the red and blue blur line?
Oh yeah, I can't pinpoint it specifically, but I do remember.
So I read it, and because I know you and I know that I'm gonna talk to you, I was like, "Did you see that red and blue blur?" And I was like, "Oh, it's the blur. It's the blur. That's where it came from."
Yes.
So I wonder if somebody's reading it going or writing it going like, "Oh, we should call him that in Smallville. That'd be smart."
When we get to Funeral for a Friend, there's something that made me think of Smallville, and I'll definitely bring it up. In the Justice League issue, that's very early on in the death of Superman. It's interesting the way that issue unfolds, because for most of the issue, as the Justice League is doing battle against Doomsday and faring very poorly. Superman is being interviewed by Cat Grant on live television.
Oh,
And,
right. Yeah.
Obviously, it's very on the nose, but I still thought it worked well where, Cat asks Superman, like, has he ever been afraid? And, he talks about being afraid for other people, but he also admits, like, sometimes I'm afraid for myself. And again, it's like, reading it within the context of the death of Superman, it's like, yeah, like it's a little ham-fisted, but I don't, and now having just read all these stories, I don't know, or nothing immediately comes to mind. I can't think of other instances where Clark has explicitly articulated that level of fear for himself, right? Like, I'm afraid sometimes that I might not survive this. And so I just thought it was nice to kind of have that moment right before all of this. And just a reminder of, like, yes, for as powerful as he is a man at the end of the day. He's brought up as a man, and the same fears about our mortality that we all have, it's like he has them too. And it's like, yeah, it's a different level, right? But they're still there. I appreciated that moment. I thought that was cool. I
did like it. He says fear is part of the job. That was the line that he used. He goes, fear is part of the job. And it's funny, Anthony, like I feel like we each have things in our Superman universe that stick with us. And I always go back to the Justice League Unlimited, where Superman says he lives in a world of cardboard. And I think his fear is also that he'll lose control. And don't forget, leading up to this book, he's lost control a number of times for various reasons, whether it's the Eradicator or a mental break. And I think that's also a very vulnerable side of what he's saying in the interview. Like, I'm not just afraid of monsters and villains, but fear is part of being a hero. Like, am I going to go too far? Am I going to hurt somebody when I'm stopping a crime because I have super strength? So it's just a very interesting, vulnerable moment. Like you said, I liked it a lot.
Yeah, no, agreed. As we get to the end of the death of Superman, and we'll talk more about the Kents after our commercial break, and we talk more about the funeral, but watching the Kents watch their son on television, that really, packed a punch. And when we get to our final montage at the end of Superman 75, where we see various people reacting to the death, and, you see Jonathan and Martha holding each other as their son is dead on their television screen. I mean, it's very impactful. As we discussed earlier, I really do think that the decreasing panel per page structure really did add a lot to the story, and especially in Superman 75, all those splash pages, it really just had this epic scope to it. And, when the dialogue and the thought bubbles finally stop and the captions take over, it's as if it's as if the music is swelling now here too. And, we get the comparison of Superman and Doomsday to, weary boxers or weary fighters who have gone the distance. And, the iconic image of the two of them locked in those final blows as they both deliver, those final punches. Again, just all these years later, I mean, it just really, it just sticks with you. I mean, beautiful art and just iconic imagery. There's not much more analysis to add. I just felt like it just really, it just told the story in a really powerful way. And, we get to, that final spread, which in the original comic and the original trade, unfolds, right? You literally unfold the page and you see Superman sprawled out. In subsequent printings, they just kind of did, like, you turn the page, it's a different double page spread, but originally, right, like you unfold it.
Unfolded it, yeah.
Yeah, and, it's just Superman, Doomsday's down, right? And again, of course, I know readers know this, but, Superman's final words, he's just like, Doomsday, he just wants to know that he did what he needed to do and he stopped Doomsday. This is of course different than the recent animated adaptation, which I think gave him more, definitely more tear-inducing final words as he's talking to Lois about. I believe the line is like, hey, how lucky was I, that I got to love you, or something, something to that effect.
Right.
We don't go there here. In fact, I actually think the comic is more realistic
Yeah.
You know, I think the animated movie gives us more of that like movie moment. I think the comic is really kind of like how it would actually play out.
Yeah, he wouldn't have had that time. He was dying. That was it.
Yeah.
I I'm not a huge fan of art museums. So when I go, I appreciate, I'm like, oh, that's neat, and I move on. But I tell you, as I was reading this, I scoured over 75. Like I went back forth a number of times. I read the last 6 pages like at least 5 times. It's like, oh my gosh, look at that. Look at the detail in this. Look at the splash on this. Look at how they have him laying even. Like just he was defeated. It wasn't like he was placed nicely. He was just broken. And that added again a very realistic, what would happen if you got just beaten to death, basically, and you're just there and your loved one is holding you saying goodbye. And I think I scoured that, like absorbing that more as an adult than I think I ever did when I first read it when I was, 15, 16 years old.
Yeah. I get that totally. I think, again, like reading that Wizard issue and seeing some of the criticisms of the story and recognizing, I don't, I can't say for sure exactly how the story is sort of viewed generally. As with anything, you get a mix, but I do think that, again, I don't want to paint with a kind of a broad stroke here, but I think for kind of critics of the story, I think a lot of times it might come down to the effect that it had, the fact that then all of these other characters went through some version of death and return, right?
Right.
And or the effect that it had, on the industry, right? There were so many people who bought copies of The Death of Superman thinking they would send their kids to college, right? And and so I think there's a lot mixed up in The Death of Superman. And I think sometimes, and this is just my own sense and my own speculation, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like sometimes some of maybe the negative sentiment towards this is kind of mixed up a little bit more in that aspect. And that's not to say everyone has to love the story. You can have perfectly valid criticisms of it. That's perfectly fine. And I recognize, although, it's funny because I was going to say that it's like, yeah, of course I love the story. It was my entry point. But I really was reading this or trying to read it as objectively and critically as possible.
Same.
Honestly. And I really feel like it holds up. And with the exception of that Justice League lineup, I really feel like.
Yeah, right. I think that there are, I don't know. Okay, how can I say this well? I think there are true fans who will look at it and really pick it apart and go, yeah, you know what? This is why I appreciate it. I think that there are some folks that will be nostalgic and go, oh, that was cool. They don't do a deep dive again. They just put it on the shelf kind of idea. But I think there's also a number of people that thought it was a publicity stunt. And I think that's why they treated it. And don't forget, Wizard is, while it's a comics magazine, it's still an opinion-based magazine. It's they're trying to sell issues just like Superman's trying to sell issues. So they're going to have controversy. They want to get different opinions. Everybody's got an opinion. But I think the true fans that have stuck with it over the decades too can see why it's important both before, during, and after the death, and not just an event itself, like you said earlier.
And I think especially for those who were readers at the time, and now I can say I'm, kind of in that category, right? Like now having read the stories that led up to it, I really think that, and maybe there were people who had been reading and they were turned off by this, but I think if you were reading, I think this was a very satisfying story, for all the reasons that we've talked about. So, man, I've enjoyed this. And of course we'll continue talking about, I'm sure we'll keep jumping back to the death over the rest of this episode and the one to come. But if you're good, let's take a commercial break and then we'll come back and we'll dive into Funeral for a Friend. Yeah.
Yeah. No worries, man. Let's do it.
All right. We'll be right back. Shadadigans is a weekly podcast by dads sharing their fairly new dad experiences and also just talking about whatever. Listen, relate, and laugh. I was a guest on episode 90, and it was a blast. One of the hosts is a multiple guest of this show, Justin DeVoe. To follow Justin's fitness and cosplay journey, follow him on Instagram at RealLifeLobo. And if you're interested in starting or continuing your own fitness journey, check out Iron and Honor on Instagram. If you enjoy this show, please make sure you subscribe, rate, and review. I also hope you'll consider joining my Patreon community. The support of my patrons enables me to produce this podcast, and patrons get rewards too, including exclusive episodes, advanced listens, and more. Sign up today and get instant access to the back catalog. Visit patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. Thank you to all of my patrons. I truly appreciate your support. And we're back. All right, so now we turn our attention to Funeral for a Friend, which, you know, again, as we've talked about, like there was a lot going on in the death of Superman, but Funeral is just really emotionally resonant, and it especially for people who had been following the books. I mean, I think this gave you all of the moments that you would want to see as far as, you know, Superman's, friends and allies and loved ones mourning him. And it was a highly effective story. I so appreciated that part one of Funeral for a Friend began literally moments after his death as they're trying to revive him. I feel like it would have been so easy to have a time jump of any amount. And I really appreciated though that we stayed in that moment. I feel like, again, for people who like dropped in just for the Death of Superman event, like whatever, but for people who were following it, it felt very fitting that we continued to stay in that moment there. What did you think about how it started?
You know, I love that because I mean, the first page is them trying to resuscitate him. And I like that's what should happen. I mean, we need to think of this. I mean, the way I see death, funeral, reign, and return, it is very much like the old Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers 30s serial. Like it is one long story. They tacked on the Superman Doomsday stuff in the collection because that's important to have like the backstory. But really, volumes 1 through 4 is in real time, back to back, all the way through. And I love that. I think that's why people struggle because they say, why isn't there a good adaptation like live movie? Well, because you need 4 movies that would take it all the way through the way you'd want it to be depicted. I feel blessed that we actually have the Death and Reign cartoons because I think they actually did it really well. So I'm with you. I forgot about that. And I was like, oh, I was so sad by the death. And then it's like, oh, they got paddles out and they're like clear. And they're trying to get them going. But then wasn't it Guardian or somebody had to hold the paddles to try to, they had the force. Oh no, Bibbo. It's Bibbo.
That's Bibbo.
It's so sad. And he's like, I'll do it for my main man. And like, he sits down and it's like, oh my God.
So two things. One, I agree with you. And, you know, the adaptations, I mean, that's really its own conversation. And like I said, we'll do that Patreon episode on the new animated adaptations. But I mean, it's true. I think anytime we see other media try to adapt this, it's very difficult. And I think that's why I think these recent animated movies did a really great job, but it took them 2 movies. You know, one of DC's first direct-to-DVD animated adaptations was Superman Doomsday, and they tried to cram all of this into 75 minutes.
Yeah.
And they stripped away the Justice League and a lot of the supporting cast, and they stripped away the 4 replacement Superman. They stripped it down to 1, and it didn't work. It's tough. I mean, I think, exactly to your point, like this story works when you have these 4 Superman titles working in unison, telling this weekly Superman adventure in real time over a year.
Yeah.
You know, so there's really something to be said for that.
I think that every Superman fan has like dreamed of like the panel by panel depiction in some form of visual media that like an actor is doing it. But like the best thing that I got to do was I had 2 daughters that loved to play with action figures. So we would basically recreate Doomsday fighting Superman in the Justice League, and we would play on their floor and they would fight and hit each other at the same time. And I would tell them the story, and then we would recreate the story together with my 5 and 8 year old kids, you know, and But like, I think we always dream like, how can we see it the way we want to see it, the way it was on the book? Well, we got to read the trade. That's all we get. But it's epic, man. That's why we're talking about it.
It really is. But that's beautiful though that you had that moment with them. I wanted, the other thing I wanted to mention was about Bibbo. You know, Bibbo broke my heart a few times in this story. You know, when he uses the defibrillator pads on Superman, and he's using a force field that Emil Hamilton created, and they're, you know, they're channeling energy from one of the like laser cannons from one of the Cadmus soldiers, right, through this machine into the paddles. Hence the need for the force field. But, you know, Bibbo says it's like, if anything goes wrong, like, no one's going to miss a pug like me. And, you know, that really gets you. And, you know, later on in the story, much like Jesus, when the merchants were peddling their wares right at the temple, and he flipped over the tables.
Thank you. I love this scene so much.
You know, where you have this citizen, you know, selling, you know, Death of Superman merchandise, and, you know, Bibbo stops him. But I thought what was so powerful about that scene is, and again, going back to what I was saying before about how Superman for these characters and for us, the reader, really becomes this ideal. You know, Bibbo's like, you know, Superman wouldn't smack this guy around. So like, let me find another way. And Bibbo, fresh off of winning the lottery, as has been depicted in the prior issues, he's like, I'll buy everything you have. Because the guy, to his credit, the guy is like, you know, I'm out of work. I'm just trying to feed my family. And Bibbo's like, I'll buy everything. Like, put this stuff away. And I just thought it was really, really powerful.
There's one line I think also that, if you remember, the guy took it one step forward. He lost his job, but then, like, he literally just said, everything I had, like, it with the destruction, like, going on, this is all I can do right now. So Bibbo offers him a job. He doesn't just buy all the merch. He says, you know what? Come by the Ace of Clubs and I'll make sure I can take care of you. Like, this is what I'm talking about, Anthony. So, like, you don't need superheroes or superpowers to be Superman. Bibbo is exactly what proves that point. He doesn't have super strength. I mean, he's jacked, but he lucked out and won the lottery, but he's paying it forward because that's what a Superman does. And that's, Bibbo always grabbed at my heartstrings every single time I see that guy in the comics. I miss him. I wish he was back.
Yeah, it's again, it's you know, he's not a man of you know, great intelligence, but, you know, he's got the heart. You know, he's got the heart. And you know, there's another scene where Bibbo prays for Superman, and, you know, he says a Hail Mary, and at the end he's like, you know, God, look, why would you take someone like Superman and a washed up, you know, roughneck like me keeps going? Like, it's not fair. And again, there's just such a purity of spirit of Bibbo, you know, a simpleness and a purity to the character. And, you know, he represents, I mean, for us reading the stories, I mean, he very much represents Suicide Slum. Like, he represents an entire part of Metropolis. And so, you know, I always enjoy, his scenes. And yeah, you're right. It's not just buying up everything that guy has. It's going that step further and offering him the job. And again, you know, you see numerous instances of that. Like at the funeral, Keith, the young boy from the orphanage who Superman has now saved on a couple of occasions. Yeah. And he'll play a large role in the books moving forward. He ultimately is adopted by Perry and Alice, and, you know, we'll get to that in the future. But you know, he sees someone being picked on at the funeral, and for those of us who've been reading the books, that was actually the family that lived next door to Clark, the abusive husband and wife, and we talked about that in the prior episode. But, you know, Keith sees this little brother getting picked on, and he's like, you know, Superman wouldn't stand for this. Like, you don't use, you know, you don't pick on someone smaller than you. And he, you know, he steps up, and there's the great Metropolis Mailbag 2 episode or issue, you know, a year prior in the books, right? Like, we had this great issue where we got to see this tradition that Superman carries on, where he goes to the post office and he reads through letters that have been sent to Superman, and he tries to help whoever he can, right? And he has to, you know, a lot of them are, you know, people asking for, you know, trying to make money off of him, or, you know, things like that. And he kind of has to sift through it and see where he can actually help. And so in the funeral for a friend storyline, you have the Justice League stepping in and doing that for him, like trying to, again, like follow this example that he set. And so, those are just a few examples of that. But I think throughout the storyline, you see that. And I think that's, the grief aspect, I think, is always going to kind of tug at the heartstrings, and we're going to really feel something because it's just so, it's right there and it's very raw. But I think these examples of people trying to follow in the footsteps of Superman and live up to his example, I think that's the real strength of Funeral for a Friend.
Well, and I think that's why this has stuck with us and so many people for so long, because comics sometimes forget that their characters are fantasy, but many times set in a real world setting. So what would really happen if a Superman died? How would we be affected as the general man? And honestly, how would his friends feel? I really appreciate the real world aspect of what Funeral for a Friend does. I would have been very frustrated if it went from Death of Superman directly to Reign of the Superman, because that would be a very entertainment comic-y thing to do. But I do feel DC took a healthy risk and say, no, we owe the character who's been around for now 60 years. Let's honor him in a way that we would our own family member, which he is in the DC Comics universe. So I loved how real it felt, and I'm sure we're going to go into each character, but should we transition to kind of Lois and how she deals with it?
Absolutely. And I'll toss it to you first. The last thing I want to say, just to close that loop, is, they don't get a ton of play in these issues, but we do see that there's this cult of Superman that emerges, right? And they're worshiping at the memorial in Centennial Park. And, in a prior episode of this podcast, we talked about the religious implications of what it would be like if a Superman existed. And, exactly to your point, it's like, I think this story really did do a great job of showing a realistic depiction of what would happen if there were a Superman and if a Superman died. And 100% people would put on a Superman robe and wait for his resurrection. So I feel like that's, again, one small example, but perfectly represents, again, the realism of this story. And the fact that they took these issues to lay this all out. I know that's the thing. It's like, when you look back at this, the fact that we're still talking about it, the fact that it continues to be adapted in movies and cartoons and things like that. And, it's had this staying power. And not to put too fine a point on it, but if not for the Funeral for a Friend aspect of this, I don't know. I don't know if it has quite the legacy. I think this is really kind of, if you don't have this, the rest of it kind of falls away. In any event, I'm with you. Do you want to? I'll let you. Why don't you kick it off first on Lois's part in this?
So it's funny. Like, there's no reason why I would forget this as a Superman fan, knowing that Superman and Clark Kent are the same people. But you do get to that point where you're going, oh my gosh, Lois is mourning two deaths. So she's mourning who Superman is and was to her, and also the realization that her soon-to-be husband has just died. And now, how do we explain this to the world and dealing with that? And let's forget how do we explain it to the world. She has to get the strength to call the Kents. And you see over the course of issues that she is stalling, and she doesn't really know what to say. She says that, I don't know what to say to the Kents. And then she finally does, and she's crying, and they're crying, and they're trying to console her, which is, again, another testament to why we need the Kents. They are just as giving and graceful as Superman was in life as he is in death.
Yeah, Lois and the Kents, break your heart numerous times over in this story. Lois, for the reasons you said, and also for the guilt, that she feels, and it's an unreasonable guilt, right? It's like, well, what could she have done? But she still feels this guilt that it's like all she could do is report on this as their son was being killed. And, again, it really breaks your heart. And like you said, it's that she's mourning two people. but the world doesn't know that. And it's just, it's like, you know, when every character keeps telling her like, oh, I think they'll find, you know, don't worry, like they'll probably find Clark, right? The cover story is that he's like lost in the rubble with the other citizens. And it's like, of course she knows that's not the case. And like, she has to, you know, put on this front and, you know, you so feel for the character in the first part of Funeral for a Friend where, you know, the SCU and Cadmus and everyone's ready to just kind of like write Superman off. And you feel her frustration where she just like explodes and she's like, we owe this man more. Like we have to try. Like we have to try to do something to revive him. Again, like it comes through and you feel it. And, you know, you mentioned the Kents. Again, where I teared up the most in rereading this, really were most of the scenes with the Kents. You know, when they're watching their son die, and then just dealing with the aftermath, not being able to have his body, not being able to be there at the funeral. You know, one moment that, you know, it was sad, but also uplifting was, you know, it's, you know, they talk about, you know, their parents now who have lost a child, like that, what reason do they have, right? To be, and then Lois finally calls and they sense immediately how much she needs them. And that gives them a renewed sense of purpose. And they're like, we'll be on the next flight to Metropolis. And it just gives, you know, reinvigorates them just that little bit. I mean, of course they're still devastated, but it's like, no, someone still needs them. They still have a role. And yeah, that was a real standout moment.
There's some cool parallels because I want to say, I'm trying to think that when this was still happening, Lois and Clark, the TV show, was still on. And
no, it hadn't started yet.
No, I'm pretty sure. I thought it was.
It was 93. No, because I'm almost positive because I've been mapping this out, and unless I like completely blew it, I believe that because it premiered. I want to say it was like the fall of '93, which was as Reign of the Superman was ending.
Okay,
yeah.
So that means Lois and Clark did a really good job because as you watch the show, I mean, the Kents lived in Metropolis, but when bad things happened or when they could get a sense that something was wrong, Ma and Pa Kent would show up at Clark's door or show up at Lois's door. And there's such a cool thing there where like they're not even married yet and possibly not going to get married because he's dead. They don't know he's going to come back, but to treat her still like you're going to be our daughter, we're going to treat you like you are our daughter. And that was so cool. Now, we keep going back, and poor listeners are going to hear us like broken records. But the reason the Kents are important is lines like this that I wrote down. So there's a flashback that Pa is having with a moment with Clark. And Clark says to his dad, "You're the one who taught me how to care." And I was like, oh my God. Like, if we can't make it more clear that Pa Kent is the reason Superman is who he is, it's that right there. The reason he puts himself in front of Metropolis, the reason he stops Doomsday, the reason he gets up and puts the cape on every morning is, Pa, you told me how to care for people, and I'm just doing that as a Kryptonian. That's all I can do. Oh my gosh. Like, again, this is why we go back to this story 30 years later. 30 years, man. It's almost so far. But yeah, I get gushy over it a lot.
Yeah, the Kents more than anything. And, you know, I know for people who have been following this podcast, I know I talk about it a lot, but yeah, it's the fundamental truth of my life that, you know, being a dad has really changed. And I know, and you're a dad, you know, it just changes the way you look at these things. And so it's like I go back and I rewatch this stuff and I reread this stuff, and it hits me in a different way. And, you know, when the Kents, you know, have their burial ceremony, you know, out on in the field where they found Clark, and, you know, it's all that they're able to do, right? Because they can't be at the official, you know, funeral, but, you know, they do what they can and they bury some of Clark's mementos. But then in, you know, one of the subsequent issues where, you know, Pa now is nearing his heart attack, right? And he's having these flashes of these moments with Clark, and, you know, Ma finds him out in the field, and you know, he just kind of collapses to his knees, and he's like, you know, when we found him, he was so helpless, and, you know, I promised I would protect him, and keep him safe. And I'm getting choked up here. And he's
Well,
like,
it's
you know,
true.
and I failed, you know, and it's
Yeah.
like, what scenario is a worse nightmare for a parent than what
Right.
what they're experiencing in that moment.
And, you know, I pray that we never have to deal with something like that in our lives, you know, but you look at your own kids and you can't help but feel guilt. Like, what did I miss something? I should have done something. And, you know, and whether you go to the Zack Snyder, Kevin Costner, or you go to the John Schneider, Jonathan Kent, they always had this sense of guilt of like, maybe I shouldn't have told you to be a hero. Maybe I shouldn't have given you permission to do that and said, no, like, please stay at home. I'm worried for you. I'm worried for, like, this is going to make your life worse than it could be, even with these powers. And again, like, the grief and the guilt, who wouldn't have a heart attack at that age?
Yeah.
And be rushed to the hospital suddenly, whether you're 35, 45, or Pa Kent. So again, like, this is drama to its finest, and we need Funeral for a Friend. If you think about it, the funeral is longer than the death.
Yes.
I think it's 9 issues. I think it's something like that.
I think it's,
But
well,
it's
yeah, I think
definitely
it's
long.
like technically 8, but then you have Adventures 500, you know, so yeah, it's it is long. Yeah. And I don't think that's right. Like, that's not an accident, and you need that room for it. And I'm so glad you mentioned the guilt, right? Cause it's not just the grief, it is that guilt. And, you know, Pa relives that moment where Clark comes to the farm after he makes his first public save, right, from Man of Steel #1. And, you know, Pa's the one, like, who comes up with this idea of having a dual identity. And it's like, yeah, in the moment, right, it sounded like the right path. But now you look at it and it's like, exactly like you said, it's like, well, I set him on this path, and he, you know, the guilt of that.
Pa's playing head games with himself. Like, I sent my daughter out to college, you know, 9 hours away, just praying she's safe and she's talking to me every few days. But, like, yeah, you never think anything bad could happen because you want the best for your kids. And that's what Pa Kent was saying. You have these gifts, go use them with the world. Like, show grace to the people that need it. That's the thing. But man, when do you want to jump into Jonathan dying, so to speak?
And well, let's get into that now, because I you know, again, the Pa stuff stood out to me more than almost anything else.
Yeah, pretty much.
You know,
yeah.
And actually, though, before I talk more about Pa, a shout out to Ma Kent, because on top of losing her son, now she's faced with the prospect of losing her husband. And you know, when Jonathan is flatlining and she's like, "Don't leave me too." Yeah. I mean, it's, again, I know for all of us, myself included, and I know I talk more about Pa because that's who I identify with more, but you know, Ma's there too. And it's like the notion of her losing her son and then her husband immediately thereafter, you know, it's just, it guts you. But, yeah, I want to talk about amazing. We're in Spider-Man territory. Adventures 500.
I'm sure there would have been, if there was a 6th week of the month, I'm sure we would have had Amazing Superman at some point.
That's true.
They ran out of titles. Superman Man of Tomorrow, Amazing Superman.
It is 100% true. But, you know, Adventures 500, which was Jerry Ordway's final issue on the title, this is a perfect example. Actually, this might be the best example of an issue that, you know, when I read it as a kid, and at this point now, right, I was reading on my own. My dad had read me the Death, and then I started reading like very shortly thereafter. So I was reading Funeral on my own. And when I read Adventures 500 as a kid, I don't know that it really resonated with me much. I don't know how it could have. No, and you know what's funny? Very recently, I was talking to my mother recently, and I was like, you know, I'm going to be talking about the death of Superman on my podcast. I was like, what conception of death did I even have at 5? And I always wonder about that, because it's like, yeah, the death of Superman. It's like, what did I even think death was? And I asked her, and she didn't really remember like 100%. She was like, yeah, I think we had talked about, you know, like people die and then they're, you know, they're gone, you know, like a very, very like broad level general thing. And so, so again, I don't know how much I really got out of it as a kid. And also, you know, it features appearances by Cleric and Kismet and Blaze, like all these characters who now finally I know who all these people are. So I'm reading it and I'm like, this is great. It's like,
Oh
it's
yeah.
like all these callbacks, but at the time, it's like I was probably lost.
Yeah, you're some poor 5 or 6 year old kid like, who's that lady made of stars? And like, now it's like, oh, it's Kismet. Like, oh, that's Blaze. She killed freaking Jerry White. Nice job. Like, yeah, it's a mess. It's a mess. But it's I love 500. I was really happy to read that again. I know this sounds so silly, but like I'm gonna, after this podcast this weekend, I'm gonna take out the old issues. I'm not gonna necessarily go through them, but the cover art's so good, and you know what I'm talking about. There's something about just holding the book, like whether it's carefully holding the book or looking at it through a bag and a board. But man, like I have the 500 where there's like the plastic over it that you peel away, and it's Superman reaching out to Pa's hand and all that kind of stuff. This was a big deal, and it's a 500th issue. It's a big deal.
It was a milestone. In that oral history, they talked about how originally the plan was, of course, for Superman to die in 75, but then to come back in 500. And then after they saw the response to the death, they decided to expand the storyline, and they had an emergency super summit in Tarrytown, New York, in Westchester, just very, very close to where I grew up, which I thought was kind of cool. But yeah, I mean, Adventures was this milestone, and where Superman 75 had the black bag, right? This had the white bag. A couple of things that I really liked about it. One was, I guess depending on your belief system, it's like, you can look at the story as just this kind of like hallucination that Jonathan has, or you can take it more literally that he's actually encountering his son in the afterlife. And I think it works either way. But again, man, as a dad, this one really did a number on me, because I'm reading it and it's like, just like that Eradicator story I talked about before, there it was in the real world, not the afterlife, but it's like the Kents went and they got their son and they set him straight. And, similarly here too, it's like in the afterlife, like Jonathan, he gets his son, and, there's that moment where, they're both going to fight their way back, and there's this portal and they don't know exactly where it leads. And, Jonathan is confident that it will lead them back to the land of the living. And Clark's like, let me go first. And Jonathan's like, just trust me. Like, we'll do this together. And, as we ultimately know, right, it's the right choice. But it really got me. And, the other thing, this is the Smallville connection, and maybe you'll appreciate this as well. I know I've talked about this scene a number of times on this podcast, but it's one of my favorites from the series finale.
Oh yeah.
Where Ghost Jonathan is giving Clark the final guidance before Clark faces Darkseid. And Jonathan's like, my guidance just isn't enough. You're going to have to trust Jor-El. And, that's such a huge moment for the show, because there was all this tension between the human and the Kryptonian, Jor-El and Jonathan. And there's this moment in Adventures 500 where, Jonathan is like, you're probably only and it's it's a little heady, but he's like, you're probably only here because of the faith we brought you up in, and this conception of your mortality. It's like, you're not human. You don't have, because, Clark in the afterlife is like, well, it's my time. Jonathan's like, it doesn't have to be. He's like, I need you to not think like an earthling. And it just made me think of that final guidance from Smallville, where it's like, there's this other side of you, and you need to embrace that now. And that's going to be your salvation.
I love how you have to say to me, I think you'll appreciate this. I named my daughter Lana. I love how that's even a question. Like, Bernie, you'll probably like this.
At least I wasn't like Bernie. There was a television show. It was called Smallville.
Yeah. Did it run for 5 or 10 years? Yeah. I mean, the only reason our daughter's not named Lois is because that just was like a little too old timey to have a kid born in 2006 with a name like Lois. I mean, we had a plan. If our kid was a boy, Lana would have been Caleb Elliott.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Very nice.
So, and it was being Caleb with a K. Like, and I have friends that did it, I was pissed. I was like, oh, they got to do it. Like, they have Kal-El. It's not okay. But you know what? We have Lana, and she's got the Lana action figure in the case on her wall, and she watched all 10 seasons. God love her with me of Smallville, and she still loves that series finale. That's one of her favorite episodes.
Yeah,
even though we only saw Superman in digital imaging, but but that's a whole nother podcast. Always hold on to Smallville, Anthony. It's okay. Always hold on to Smallville.
I think. Look, a very quick tangent. I think that's the strength of the. I think that's the strength of the show and the series finale. That it's like, the execution, the fact that we only saw Clark as Superman via CGI was a major frustration. But it's like there were enough moments that really brought his arc full circle and brought him where he needed to be in terms of that personal development. That I look back on it and it's like. You can't think of the finale and not think of the CGI, but at the same time, it's not enough. It's not enough to make me look on the finale unfavorably. I still love it so much.
And sorry, fans, not to extend the tangent, but like my 14-year-old daughter, who has watched all 10 seasons, has seen all the Christopher Reeve movies, has watched Superman and Lois the entire first season, and has even watched episodes of Lois and Clark with me. Still thinks Erica Durance is the best Lois Lane. Like she says, she is the spunk and like fire that is Lois Lane. I was like, and this is why you're my kid.
Good. Well, you're raising her right. She is the best Lois Lane. I mean, she just is.
Yep. And she's easy to look at too.
I think she had the best combination of the qualities that you would want in Lois. I don't know that any of the others have had like all of the qualities like in that combination. I think Terry Hatcher was a very, very close second for me.
I would say so too. I'm sure you do this too, and I'm sure readers have done this, but as we look at like major story arcs, like what actors you would put in the Death of Superman movie for yourself, like who would play Superman, who would play Lois, who would, that kind of stuff. I can see Erica doing Lois really well. It's kind of cool. So
all right.
Sure. So sorry guys, sorry everybody. Tangent over. We're good. Back to the funeral.
But yeah, I mean, so that's I guess we've kind of covered the Kents and all of this.
Yeah.
And again, like I said before, I think this is one of those instances where it's like, this is why. The Kents are alive post-crisis. This is why you're telling the story post-crisis. It just adds this whole other component to it that you just wouldn't have otherwise. Where else would you like to go next?
All right, I'm gonna make a connection to Jimmy Olsen. I think this is important for us to think about. You made a really cool connection and parallel to 9/11. There's a scene where Jimmy's selling the pictures to News Time that he took of the battle, of Superman's death, and he's feeling really not okay because some of the best pictures he's ever taken in his career are of the worst moment in his life, are of the hardest thing for probably Metropolis and maybe the world in this case, in the DC universe. But you parallel that, think about all the news journalists, photographers that took these artistic, incredible, in the moment pictures of 9/11, both the snapshots of that moment, but also the hurt.
Yeah.
And you see a lot of them in the Memorial Museum, which I don't know if you've had a chance to go to, but like to be a photographer and go, I'm going to be made famous for one of the worst pictures in human history. That's tough. And I read that with a very, very different lens, thinking about 9/11 and paralleling it to this story with Jimmy Olsen. And I think it's important we think about that. It's just, he's a regular dude, never wanted to be there, but he was doing his job with Lois, and that's what he gets.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And yeah, I mean, again, this comparison to 9/11, and of course we just passed the 20-year anniversary, and it's just like reading this story again, just seeing what it's like when something in this vein actually happens. and seeing the fallout again, it really just does kind of, paint the story in a different light. And it's like, well, you really see how someone like Jimmy would struggle with this. I mean, whereas, I don't know, in the past, maybe you would look at Jimmy's internal struggle here and it still works, but I think it definitely is on a whole other level now.
I think as adults now, I mean, it's a very different approach. And even really, if you look at even like Crisis to 1993, there was nothing like 9/11 that happened in those 7 years. But now when you have that in as part of our history, it's a cataclysm. Like that's what that would look like. Metropolis would look like Battery Park. That's how it would be.
Yeah. I mean, not to take us on another tangent, but again, having just passed the 20th anniversary, my wife and I were talking about that and where we were and what our experience, what our reactions were at the time. And we both came to the same conclusion. It's like, I remember when they, when we got the new, it was my first week of high school. And I remember, when they made the announcement about the first plane, like my thought was like, well, was the pilot drunk? Like that was
right.
And I said to, and my wife was like, yeah, I kind of thought something similar. And I was like, it's like, why would you think it was anything else? And I was like, I don't know what conception of terrorism I would have even had like at that point in time. It's like, now having lived through it, it's like, of course, that's the first thing you would think of. But without that context, like at the time in that moment, it's like, it didn't even cross my mind with the first one where I was like, oh, like that's what it was. So, I don't want to say,
I don't want to say it's a blessing. That's not the right word, but like the fact that you were at an age to remember it. And I was a teacher in my third year of teaching, watching it in the TV station. My students ran in and said, Mr. G, you're from New Jersey. Like, I think something happened to the World Trade Center. I was like, no, that was 93. There was the bombing. No, I'm sure it's just something weird. And then when we're watching it, I think when it's real to us versus a history page, like to kids now, 9/11 is like what the JFK assassination is to us, but I think I really, no joke, read The Death of Superman and looking at the devastation, and it made me go like, oh my gosh, like that looks like downtown New York. That's what that looks like. I hate the fact that they knew that it would look like that. And that's when I watched Man of Steel. The same stuff was happening in my head. I was like, oh God, this is like, if this happened, this is terrible. Like that's why the death and the funeral always resonates with me, I think too, because it's very real. We saw images like that.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think for anyone, like if you haven't read it in a while, I mean, I recommend, I think just as a comic book story, it's worth revisiting, but just in terms of everything that we've been through, in the real world, I think you would get something different out of it now. Maybe bringing us, I don't know if this is on a lighter note per se, but
no. Right. I guess
a lot of the, again, I think the emotional beats of the story are the grief and as we've been discussing, a lot of the plot of Funeral for a Friend, aside from the literal funeral itself, but a lot of it revolves around the body of Superman.
Yeah.
And specifically this kind of tug of war between Cadmus and the SCU and Lex and Metropolis generally, where, Paul Westfield, the director of Cadmus, wants the body of Superman to dissect and study and clone, right? And of course, we all know where this is leading with the creation of Superboy.
Oh, yeah.
But right off the bat, I mean, even in the first part of Funeral for a Friend, I mean, Westfield shows up and he's ready to take that body. And I loved when Turpin just socked him. That was great. Standing up for Maggie Sawyer. Yeah.
My line that I wrote down is Dan Turpin is old timey, but awesome. Like he's got that like derby hat and a cigar. And then he's like, you're done. Boom! And the picture, he just like socks him in the stomach. And I think Guardian was even like, yeah, like, you had that coming, buddy.
Well, Guardian has his own moment when, so eventually, and Lex the Second intervenes as well and is able to pull some strings in DC and is able to kind of keep Cadmus at bay because by rights, I guess Cadmus has claim to the dead body of any alien on Earth, and Lex is able to pull some strings, and they're able to bury Superman in Metropolis. And but then Westfield steals the body, and Guardian ultimately discovers this in Cadmus, and confronts Westfield harshly and calls him a ghoul. For what he's tried to do. Although then Guardian ultimately is swayed by the greater good potentially of creating a new Superman, and he does allow the experiments to continue. Of course, eventually Supergirl, working as the agent of Lex, will retrieve the body and return it to its tomb underneath the statue in Centennial Park. But yeah, there's a lot of jockeying for possession of the body of Superman. Which, again, I think it worked well, and we got to, I don't know, this is sound weird, but it's like Superman was still part of the story in a literal way, right? Like we saw his body, and just seeing that lifeless body in and of itself was very striking, and that was difficult to deal with. But it was interesting. I thought that so much of the story kind of was revolved around the body.
It's kind of like watching Twin Peaks. Like Laura Palmer's she's not alive. Like she's a character in the show, but she's dead for the whole show. But as we go to the end, we come to the point where now the body's gone officially. Yep. And I loved how the funeral portion of this ends with the Superman sightings.
Yeah.
So now the body's gone, which is bad because it's not just Superman's body that's gone. Clark's body is gone. And that's where Lois loses her mind. But then we have all these really cool the quick montage of where Steel comes from. When we first see Cyborg Superman, we see like just the half shadow of Superman's face. We see Superboy, we see the Eradicator. And that is like it's very much like, think about the big blockbuster like Harry Potter series or like Marvel movies or those kind of things where there's a dun 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 and the next movie's coming out next year and we gotta make sure we see what happens. But thankfully it comes back. But now for Superman, how many months were they off? I feel like it said they took 3 months off.
Yeah, 3 months.
Yeah, so that's a long time when you had a Superman book every week.
It's very true. On the note of so at the end of Adventures 500, we have these quick teases, right, of the 4 replacement Superman. This was frustrating to me in the trade paperback series that you and I have. It's a 5-volume set.
Yeah.
They omit them. They include them at the beginning of volume 3, but they don't have them at the end of volume 2. And I really feel like that takes something away. Exactly to your point. I feel like having them at the end of 500 really is like that post-credit scene, like, hey, like this is coming. So I was disappointed that they did that.
But if you own the omnibus, it's in.
Yeah,
it's again, so pathetic.
The trades have them. It's just that they don't include them at the end of volume 2 as part of Adventures 500, which again I think was a mistake in collecting this. But and the other thing too is that earlier in Funeral for a Friend, where the body is stolen, the casket is stolen as well, right? So, but at the end of 500, the coffin is still there, but the body is gone, and then it's like, is he actually back? And that of course sets off what we'll be talking about in the next episode. We haven't really spoken a ton about Lex II, who of course is Lex the First, posing as his own son in a cloned body, because they saved Luthor's brain. But do we know this? We know this at that point, right? We know this. Yep.
Okay, that's right. Because you've read that. Yeah, you've read that, I think, more recently than I have. Yeah.
Yeah, so we, the audience, know. We didn't know initially, right, when Lex II debuted. Right. The audience was kind of in the dark, and then we found out. But the other characters don't know. Only Lex's innermost circle knows this. Doctors Kelly and Happerson.
He dies at the end of Crimson Kryptonite, right? I think that's a time frame. It's like
after
maybe 2 issues after that.
Yeah, it's within that. It's within that time frame. But I thought the most striking and evocative Lex II scene was after they retrieve the body from Cadmus. And Lex asks for a moment alone in the tomb to pray.
Oh, but he like hovers over the body, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And did he just say something like, "I've got you now," or something like that? It's so weird.
Yeah, it's dark and creepy, and the art really conveys just this hate for Superman, and he's like, "I buried you," like, and you know, earlier in Funeral for a Friend, you know, in his private moments, you know, he's angry that he was robbed of the chance to kill Superman.
Oh yeah,
but if nothing else, he'll bury him. And you know, it's this weird thing where, like, obviously his intentions are bad, for lack of a better word, right? His bad intentions, but his objectives and Lois's and everyone, like, their objectives are aligned, right? Like, they want to save the body and protect the body. Lex, because he like wants to like stick the nail in the coffin.
Yeah. Like, I know where you are now. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it's this weird thing where it's like they dovetail like their interests for very different reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that, because I remember in your deep dive, there's that moment where Metallo is going to kill him way early in the Byrne run. And he stops and he's like, "No, nobody's killing Superman except for me." And like, so he's got to be so pissed. Like, this freaking thing comes out of the ground and kills Superman. But now he's just happy. He goes, "I got your body right here. We're good. I know you're dead. We're good." And then he gone, and we get 4 new ones.
Yeah. Man, it was so great to revisit. Was there anything else that you had in your notes that you wanted to cover that we haven't gotten to?
Gosh, man. Got that. We talked through so much stuff. It is kind of funny to take notes while I'm reading stuff, though. It's really cool because it makes me really ponder, like, what sticks out to me, what's important to think about. No, I think we hit it all, man. I know we're going on. I think we're at 2 hours and 40 minutes.
We took a little break, so we're not quite at 40 yet, but we're just under 2.5 hours.
Okay.
Yeah, but is there anything else that you wanted to say before we sign off?
Please. Let's sign off. You close us up, buddy. We'll talk again when we get to the rain.
Yeah, you know, Bernie, I want to tell you, I said at the start of this that the reading experience was a gift, like being able to come at this story as if I were reading it for the first time, and that's true. This conversation was really a gift, and I thank you very much for giving it to me, because, you know, and we talked about this off mic during our little break here, but it's like, you know, for both of us, I know the story means a lot, and so to be able to talk for this length, you know, about it, and honestly, I know we could hit 3 hours. It's like,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
But it's really, I've so enjoyed this, and to our audience, I mean, thank you. However many sittings this took you to get through, it's all good. I hope you enjoyed it. And, you know, if you, I guess, you know, if you share the love that we do for Death of Superman, hopefully you enjoyed this. You know, if you didn't coming into this, I don't know, maybe this might make you take another look at the story. I hope it does. And if it does, I hope that, you know, you get something out of it, you know, even as close to what we have. Again, I not to belabor the point, but I just, like I said, in the past, I really looked at this more as this, you know, as the event that it was. And now I looked at it more as a story. And I was never embarrassed to say that I started with Death of Superman. Never embarrassed. But again, I know there's a lot mixed up in it. The speculator craze that it incited, and, you know, the legacy of storytelling that saw a lot of other characters get upended, you know, to do something similar to this. I recognize all of that. And I guess I've kind of always had that in mind. And I know that, you know, again, not everybody loves this story per se, but I say it loud and proud, man. Like, I started with the Death of Superman, and it was a great place to start. And it was a great place for purposes of this podcast event to like build to. And I love it. I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for everything that it kind of launched for me personally and creatively. And, I mentioned the comic shop and the documentaries and the podcast and all, and, of course, all of that, but just the hobby, the hobby of being a comics reader and collector. There are a lot of ways to spend your time and money and effort and energy that aren't necessarily healthy or productive or worthwhile. And comics are great. And I'm so glad that, growing up, until I got to the point where I was really, part of the community at my comic shop, and I finally had these people to talk to. Growing up, like in school, there weren't people in my classes who read comics. Like I was an outlier, in that, but that never deterred me, and I'm glad. Yeah. And I'm glad that this is a hobby that has become a lifelong passion. And, it all goes back to, that story and that comic shop, so, again, I'm just so proud and grateful to have started this journey with the death of Superman. That's all I got.
I'm excited. We got part 8 to finish together, my friend.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of great storytelling from the Reign through the Returns. So that's going to be a great end cap to the 8-part series, man.
Yeah. So Bernie, you and I will be back in 1 week to discuss the Reign and Return. A week after that, on my Patreon page, I'm going to have that discussion of the animated adaptation. So that'll be a very nice kind of a supplement or complement to these episodes that we're doing now. I also meant to mention this earlier, and then we really will sign off here, but there were a couple of recent anniversaries within the world of Superman that we've been preoccupied here on the show, but I just wanted to at least acknowledge here. The Superman the Animated Series celebrated its 25th anniversary, and I have big plans actually to cover that animated series at the beginning of 2022. So stay tuned. It's going to be a lot of fun. One word remix. All right. It's going to be great. And Smallville, our beloved Smallville. This episode will be out mid-October, the 20th anniversary of the series premiere of Smallville.
That's crazy.
Smallville is something that comes up in a lot of episodes. It's something that we've devoted a couple of episodes to fully. It's something that, I have this podcast mapped out like real far like crazy, stupidly far in advance. And in every year of this podcast that I'm planning, there's Smallville coverage because I love it. And, kudos to that show for its 20-year anniversary and for the decade-long run it had, because it's no small feat. And, its role in my Superman fan journey is, it's like Death of Superman and Smallville, they're like neck and neck. I have to give the edge to Death because it was the start, but Smallville is like a hair away from it. So a couple of big anniversaries.
And I'll believe it when I see it, but there was news from Tom Welling and Mike Rosenbaum that they're doing an animated series as the voices to take off from where Smallville left off. And again, I'm not going to hold my breath, but that could be really fun. That could be cool for us, I think, as fans. That'd be a neat continuation.
Yeah, I would definitely be intrigued. And if and when that happens, you can be sure we'll be talking about it on the podcast here. But again, thank you really, Bernie, for the gift of this conversation. I really, it really meant a lot. And I appreciate having you along for this flight here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. You are one of the few people that get why it's important to me to talk about for 2 hours and 30 minutes.
Right on. All right. So thank you, Bernie. Thank you to our audience. We'll be back in 1 week. It's the conclusion of Crisis Till Death. So make sure that you come back in 1 week. And until then, remember, it's about what you do. It's about action. Digging for Kryptonite is a Flat Squirrel production. Art by Greg Schiegel. Music by Basic Printer. Join the conversation by becoming part of the Flat Squirrel Podcast Network Facebook group. Follow Digging for Kryptonite on Instagram and Twitter, and visit flatsquirrelproductions.com to explore more of my film and podcast projects.